I'm Eric Palmer. I'm the Director of Fisheries for Vermont Fish and Wildlife. And like Commissioner Shortsleeve, want to welcome you and really thank you guys for showing up. It's great to have the interest. You've been helpful in so many ways with helping us gather data, answering surveys, and just supporting us. So thank you. I'm here on behalf of our cooperative, the Lake Champlain Fish and Wildlife Management Cooperative, that the three primary players are Vermont Fish and Wildlife, New York DEC, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then we have other strong partners from UVM, University of Plattsburgh, Lake Champlain Basin Program, and elsewhere. With that, I'll turn it over to Margaret.
Thank you, Eric. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Captain Drew Price, so Lake Champlain Fishing Guide, and Shawn Good with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department.
All right, so I'm Shawn Good, fish biologist with Vermont Fish and Wildlife. I know a lot of you in the audience. We're going to start today off a little differently than we have in some of the past years by giving an angler perspective. So we have Drew Price here that's going to give most of this presentation. I'm just going to give sort of an introduction to the Vermont Master Angler Program. I think some of you probably have heard of that program. It's one that we have been running for about 14 years now, but in case you haven't, I just wanted to sort of give an overview of the program and talk about why we implemented it in 2010, and then I'm going to hand it over to Drew to talk a little bit about his experiences with the program, and I'll mention why here at the beginning or later on in the presentation. So, as I mentioned, it was created in 2010 primarily to be an angler recognition and incentive program. And by that I mean it gives anglers some goals to sort of strive for when they're out there fishing by establishing a list of eligible species that they can catch with minimum lengths that would be recognized as a trophy-sized fish of that particular species. And there's 34 of them, so it's sort of meant to get people out there fishing for some of those species, trying to catch trophy-sized fish, and if they catch more than 5 fish in a given year, you would be considered a master angler. But I think one of the other things that's really important, maybe even more important than that, is what it does to sort of angler behavior. That motivation and incentivized fishing sort of encourages people to fish for maybe a wider variety of species that they would normally target. I know a lot of people in this room maybe think of themselves as trout and salmon anglers, or maybe you're a bass angler. But we have so many different fish species in Lake Champlain that are catchable on a rod and reel that this program really tries to encourage people to learn about those fish and get out there and try to catch them. And by setting the minimum lengths as a trophy-sized fish of all those species, it really profiles and highlights the quality of the opportunities that we have in the lake, right in our backyard. So the program has a couple of different levels of rewards. Like I mentioned, if you enter a fish and it's accepted, you go onto a gallery that's completely searchable on our website. It goes back the entire length of the program. You can punch in year, angler name, water body, fish species. You can see all the fish that have been caught in the program. So it's kind of a bragging board. You also get a certificate if you catch a fish and you check the box saying you want that certificate. If you catch 5 in a given year, like I said, you get a pin at the end of the year. The pin changes every year. They've been really, really popular with anglers who are earning them. We typically see about 80 to 100 anglers a year that earn these pins. They're one-of-a-kind pins, only available in the year that you fished. They become kind of a collector's item. And then we write a report at the end of the year that has a master list of everybody who entered a fish, as well as some other stats about the catches that year. But I just want to sort of return to that one point I made about how this program has really resulted in encouraging people to fish for something beyond what we typically consider to be our normal sport fish. Bass, trout, walleye, salmon, pike, those are the things that we all grew up as anglers thinking of as sport fish. But the reality is we have this suite of species in Lake Champlain that are really unique and different and a lot of fun to catch. And this program sort of pushes anglers outside of their comfort zone maybe a little bit to explore those other species that are on that list that are not these normal species that we always sort of feature and profile in all of our marketing and outreach, you know, saying, hey, come to Champlain, go salmon fishing, go bass fishing. Well, there's all kinds of other things out there too. And, you know, we have this amazing resource in our backyard that we really try to encourage people to expand and fully explore. And so I'm going to hand this over to Drew Price now. Drew, you know, really got excited when we started the Master Angler program in 2010 and sort of set it as a personal mission to sort of fish for every species he could on that list and catch one that was eligible for the program. In about 8 years, 10 years into it, 8 years into it, he successfully caught all 34 fish of trophy size on that list. First and only angler to ever do it, which is why I invited him here today. He likes the program so much he named his guide service after it. You still owe me money for that. But, you know, that was a pretty big accomplishment for an angler to achieve, and still to this day, 14 years later, is the only one that's done it. He's now set out to try to catch all that whole list again over exclusively on fly, which is, I don't know, I tell him he's crazy, but he caught some unusual fish on a fly that you wouldn't think you'd be able to do. So I'm going to pass it on to Drew now.
Thank you, Shawn, and thank you for having me. Captain Drew Price, Masterclass Angling. This program, as soon as this program came about, this was for me. I was like, I want to catch all of these fishes, and there was a bunch of fishes that were on there that I had never caught before. So I was like, I really want to do this, and I really wanted to. The thing that really struck me was the diversity of fisheries that we have in Vermont, and especially Lake Champlain. And you know, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the program by the numbers. And we've got 34 different species to enter. And as of yesterday, there was 12,348 entries in the program. Out of that, there was 5,349 from Lake Champlain. So that's like 43% of all the entries in this program have been caught from Lake Champlain, right? Now, we'll start looking at Lake Champlain and the fisheries in Lake Champlain and the different fish species. We've got 88 different species. There's 92 species of fish recognized in Vermont right now. So 95% of the species that are found in Vermont are found in Lake Champlain, right? That's pretty good numbers. It's the most diverse water in the state. It's really a grouping of a number of different biomes that come together in one place. It's pretty spectacular. Easternmost range for a lot of different species, especially species that I target a lot. And you know, when you think about that kind of diversity, why are anglers focused on just about 20 different game fish species, right? We all know about these guys, lake trout. We know about Atlantic salmon. We know about bass, smallmouth and largemouth. We know about pike, a lot of pike in the lake. There's walleye around. We've got rainbow trout or steelhead and brown trout. And there's a lot of perch. Perch are probably the most targeted fish on Lake Champlain, primarily through the ice. We've got you know, both yellow perch and the non-native white perch. There's people are even targeting pickerel, a lot of pickerel in the lake, and lots of sunfish, crappie. There's even muskie if you know what you're doing and you know where to find them. But what about all these other fish? You know, rock bass. You can kind of giggle about rock bass. You know, people laugh about rock bass. But getting out and catching a trophy rock bass at 10 inches or better, or trying to challenge yourself to catch an even larger one. My personal best was around 15 inches, caught in Plattsburgh in the early 90s. I mean, you know, that's not easy. You can catch plenty of little ones, but catching those bigger ones is much more challenging. What about catching eels? Shawn said, try to catch everything on a fly. I managed to sight fish an American eel with a headlamp at a boat launch in November last year, right? So, you know, I am a little crazy. There's no doubt about that. But, you know, we have a lot of eels in the lake. And how many people can say they've actually gone out and targeted eels and successfully caught large specimens? How about fall fish? This is the largest native minnow that's in this area, right? They get up to over 20 inches. They're found in the lower end of all the lake tributaries. Getting out and getting them, they're really sporting. If you target or use the right tackle, they're a blast on ultralight gear or fly gear. How about lake whitefish? We have a massive population of lake whitefish. People are starting to target them. They're starting to jig for them. But this one was really a thorn in my side for the Master Angler program. I would call up Shawn and be like, how am I going to do this? It was 150 hours on the ice before I got my first one, and it was about 250 hours before I got one that was of minimum length for the Master Angler program.
Right now, you just have the red horse category. I would like to see each of these species have their own category because they are very different sizes. And we should, I've said this to Shawn before, this is the Master Angler program, not the mediocre angler program. We should ask anglers to learn how to identify fish species. If you are a Master Angler, you should learn how to identify what you're catching. How about the catfishes? We got yellow bullhead, we got brown bullhead, we've got channel catfish. And these are all great fish. I've caught them all on flies. Actually, both of these channel cats were caught on flies. The one on my right was actually sight fished with the fly rod. I guided that guy into that fish. How about rudd? Another invasive species, but these guys are a lot of fun to catch. You use ultralight tackle or a light fly rod. And that was a 16-inch rudd. That took me a while to land. Great. Sight fished it too. How about another thorn in my side, the pickerel hunter. Gorgeous fish. You're probably going to catch them when you're targeting pike. Quite a few of them in the lake. Drum. We have a great population of freshwater drum. This is probably one of the hardest fighting fish that's in the lake. A lot of bass anglers will get them as incidental. But what about intentionally targeting? I have people who come to me to guide them into these drum, and the number of people who are coming to me and say, hey, I really want to catch a sheephead. And I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but trying to get one of these sight fish on a fly rod is a challenge. And then landing one is another challenge in itself. Great fish. Carp. I have people travel here to have me guide them for sight fishing for carp. There's probably no more challenging fish on Lake Champlain than the common carp. These guys are very spooky. They're very selective. And then when you hook into one, you're hooked into a freight train, and they usually go into the weeds. Landing carp on a fly is not easy. They're an amazing fish.
True.
And
I think a lot of your clients come from Europe for that, right?
yep, I've got clients that have come to Europe for that, and for other fish species as well. And this is actually the very first naturalized fish species found in these waters. How about long-nosed gar? Long-nosed gar, if you want a chance at getting a fish that's over 50 inches in this area, you're talking about a long-nosed gar. Sight fish for them. This is a fish that when you hook, they will do a blistering run. They will jump 4 feet in the air, and you're not using a hook. If you're doing it the way I do, I use well, there is a hook in there. There is a hook. To be legal, there is a hook in there, but they're actually the gar's teeth are getting caught in real fibers, which makes it a little bit challenging to get it out sometimes. But I'm pretty good at it. They're a native fish. I had a guy travel from Paris to have me guide him for gar and Champlain. And probably the fish I am most associated with are the bowfin. I've referred to this fish as the most American game fish. These guys are pretty much unchanged for 300 million years. There's very few fish, if any, that are on that I've already shown that have that are unchanged in that amount of time. This is a fish that I sight fish for. This is a fish that will come up, look you in the eyes. This is probably one of the most aggressive fish I've ever encountered in my life. They move like no other fish. We have an incredible population of them here. So much so that I have clients that have caught IGFA Typic Class World Record fish. Lauren Dunn on my right there has got 2 IGFA Typic Class Women's World IGFA Record bowfin. And Richard Hart holds every IGFA Typic Class record bowfin, and including this fish, which is the IGFA catch-release length record bowfin on a fly. And the majority of those fish were caught on Lake Champlain with me. We have world-class fishing for bowfin, and I've been on international TV shows bringing anglers out for bowfin. And I just wanted to point out that, like, if you change your perspective on what you do as an angler, it's going to create a lot more angling opportunities for you. Thank you very much.
I just think that that gives a little bit of a different perspective from what most of us consider to be, our traditional game fish or sport fish that we want to target on a run line. The fact that this is generating, fishing-based tourism, people coming from all over the world to experience what we have in our backyard is pretty amazing. And the Master Angler program is what really has, opened that up. So thanks again, Drew.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, we got time for questions if anybody has any. Oh yeah.
I was going to say the coffee's ready for sure now. Also, I noticed the chairs are very close together, so if you want a little more room, please feel free to move them. You don't have to touch your neighbors. Make more room and more people be coming.
Yeah.
No. The current state record is 14 pounds. The IGFA length record is 33 inches and around 13 pounds and change.
Yeah.
Comment first. I enjoy looking at the Master Angler catches because it kind of refreshes your energy or enthusiasm for, big fish that go out. Although I don't keep big fish, I throw back. But I have a question for you, Drew. And I'm impressed. I've seen your picture going way back, I think, with trout.
Yep.
Was that your original, before you became so Catholic in your fishing endeavors? Did you start there, or where did you start?
I've started fishing for a diversity of fishes right from the get-go. I fish a lot of trout. I've guided a lot of trout. But right from, the book that got me into fishing was a book from 1963. It was Better Homes and Gardens, Fish in Fishing. And the pictures in there that caught my attention were alligator gar. That was the fish that got me on the road to doing what I do. I was like, there's nothing else in this book that looks like this. This has got a mouthful of teeth. It's got these big crazy scales. I really want to catch one. I haven't yet, but that's on my bucket list. Okay. You're welcome.
We got one last question there.
Awesome.
While we change speakers.
First off, I'm a big fan of the program. I guess my question is to both of you. If you had to completely revamp this program and start it off fresh today, what's one big change that you would make to it?
Well, I don't know if I would revamp it from the ground up, but I get an email about twice a year from Drew with like 17,000 ideas on how to do that. And a lot of them are pretty good, honestly. And I think, expanding the species list beyond the 34 that we have is the first step that I would. And we originally had 33, and I changed that a year and a half ago or so, where I split the two crappie. That's all I did. And, to Drew's point, this is a program that we want people to learn from and expand their range and become better anglers. And part of that is learning how to identify fish. So lumping black and white crappie didn't make any sense to me anymore. And I think we're probably going to move that direction for the other ones that are still lumped. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there. We also need to revise the length limits. I think some of them are too low, and that was a fact that the benchmarks that we set for some of the species were based on data that we had, and a lot of these species we didn't have any data. You know, we didn't know what a trophy bowfin looks like in Lake Champlain or a gar and stuff like that. So we took a guess, set it low, and then I went fishing with Drew and caught like 10 in one day that beat that. And I'm like, okay, this is too low. And so, you know, we're addressing things like that as we go. So.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is David Sausville to update you on double-crested cormorant management.
Can you hear me in the back? I usually speak pretty low. Good? Okay. So basically, just give you a little bit of an update on double-crested cormorants. I want to give credit to John Gobel. He's the primary manager of our program, but he wasn't able to be here today. So a lot of the specific questions we'll have to get back with him on, but I've worked with John for a number of years and can fill you in pretty well. This is a very busy slide, really too busy, but I wanted to throw it up there because I'm not going to say everything on here. But basically, cormorants are nesters around the Great Lakes in the Midwest. They are in the Canadian area and also down the coast down through into Cape Cod, if you look on the map on there, the red section. They are very prolific. They've been persecuted over the decades because of the perceived effects on fish populations. They also are very efficient predators. They eat up to a pound of fish a day, anything from an inch to about 16 inches, and they average usually in the 4 to 8 inch range. Excuse me. They were protected in the early 1900s, as all our natural native birds were, by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and they started to recover. And then they started having issues with complaints in the 40s and 50s, and they started doing some control work there. DDT came along in the 50s, knocked them and many other bird species down, and once DDT was banned in 72, they started to rebound, and the first birds we saw in Vermont were around 1981. We know they weren't here. The naturalists, the historic documents that we found, we never had examples of them written in there. Champlain never mentioned them in his journals. He entered this area several times. And also, they never described islands that were denuded of trees. They're always described as, treed islands. So, with funding-wise, really started working on the birds around 1999. And this is just some of the historic funding. New York, Vermont, USDA Wildlife Services, they did the bulk of the work on the area. And in 2005 is when we started getting Great Lakes Fisheries Commission money from our senators at the time. And it kept progressing. It was looking good. You go from 100,000 to 200,000 in 3 years, and you're able to hire contractors on to help you and be able to fund staff and buy equipment. And then in around 2008, that started to go down a little bit. And during the Obama administration, they eliminated earmarks of any type. So we didn't receive any more money within the state. And it was on and off again with our USDA Wildlife Services folks. So we had some money. So it really came back to the state, and our state appropriated $40,000 a year towards equipment, salary. And in 2025, we still have $40,000 a year. So that shows you it doesn't increase very quickly if it's not a priority for some people. It's a quick timeline to show you basically what I went over. Within this time period of 81 to present, we've had just a up and down of what you can and can't do with cormorant management. We've had lawsuits that have stopped it from happening. We had to redo. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is actually the person or organization responsible for it, because they deal with all migratory birds and they manage the treaties, the federal treaty with Canada and Mexico. And so you have depredation orders for a while, which are very liberal, allowed us to do many things. Then they took those away. They went back to individual permits, so we have to apply for those individually, and I'll go over those in our next slide here. But as you can see, we really started management in 1999. It was 18 years after they showed up. We had biologists warning us of their effects on the islands back in the 70s, and nobody was picking it up and following with it, so they did end up destroying some of our islands. And then there's really active management began in 1999-2000, and I actually was lucky enough to get in on that from almost the get-go. I returned to the state in 2000. So this is the part that gets a little confusing. 03 to to 2016, we had the depredation order. As you can see, 24 states were able to use that. And it was primarily aquaculture and public resources. So our islands and the habitat are public resources. We're able to work under those. Then that was vacated by the judge in 2016 with one of the lawsuits. A number of environmental impact statements or assessments had to be redone. And so we were back to individual permits. You could get them for scientific collection if you're a university doing a study. Depredation permits are individual ones. If you could prove a detriment to health of humans, aquaculture, but that was all private. They wouldn't allow us to use it on our private or our state hatcheries or any of our wild fish if we're stocking. So we were hand kind of tied at that point. Property damage, we worked on property damage under those individual permits, and you had to apply for these each year. So they were destroying the habitat for other birds. Young Island, I'll show you an example of later on. We were trying to protect colonial water birds like black crowned night herons because they were destroying all the trees. And we wanted the ground nesting material left there for things like black ducks and mallards and other animals. And then you had some of the permits that you could get for T&E. And they developed later on a permit specifically for states and tribes. And now we're actually able to get a permit if we needed one for our hatchery, but we've never needed that in Vermont. And we are using the depredation order for habitat and damage to property. That's the one we have to do. And with those, you have to apply, as I say, every year. And it takes right now about a year. Luckily, they've changed that where our permits are going to start to be good for 3 to 5 years. And with everything that's going on in government right now, that's probably a godsend because who knows how soon some of those permits would get to us in today's political environment. So our primary colony in Vermont was Young Island. And our goal was to reduce the number of cormorants on there or eliminate nesting altogether because we wanted to restore the habitat. We also didn't want the birds going to all the other islands. We knew they were going to go to Four Brothers. We got Papa Squash. We got a number of them. So we had crews out there working at the same time to keep them off of other islands. And first you have to do things like non-lethal. So you had to use noisemakers, decoys, things like that. They only work so well and for so long. And we ended up having to do lethal control, both with the nests, treating the eggs, and or taking and eliminating adults to hit them from both directions. And then we also wanted to encourage the native species to come back, as I said. So we're working originally under the public depredation order. We had limit on the number of adults we could remove. We oiled every egg on the island. It was very effective, but when you have 3,000 to 4,000 cormorant nests, and then you have the equal number of ring-billed gold nests, it's quite a job. You're out there with actually backpack sprayers and 4 to 5 gallons of corn oil on your back and hitting every nest. We had a project going with UVM where a PhD student was studying the diet of the cormorant and also where they were moving. And we did restore the habitat on the island, as you'll see later on. Here's just a quick slide of the numbers. So we started treating in 1999. This is just Young Island. This is not the whole lake. And we had over 3,000 nests. We treated every one of them. I said, when you're treating them, that's just the eggs. You can't remove the adults at that point. We're doing no gull management. And then by 2004, you can see we cut the nests in half, and we were actually starting to remove some of the adults. So there is some active management in the early days. This is the Lake Champlain one. Can you see the numbers in the back? It looks a little light up here with today's conditions, but in 2005, we had about 4,300 nests that we knew lake-wide. If you think about the numbers I showed you on Young Island, we had about 3,000 there. So there's another 1,000 plus nests on other islands. We knew they were in Four Brothers. We had them in Flat Rock Bay down by the mouth of Otter Creek, and we had them in Sandbar and other areas like that. And I'm just going to show you can look at the numbers there. We kept working at it. We eventually started doing some gull removal, started again with lethal removal, and the EA was completed in 2010, one of them, and another one, I think it was around 2016 before we could do that. So here's some final numbers. But in today's numbers, we have probably just a little over 2,000 nests on the lake. I talked to John O'Connor from New York DEC Wednesday night at a waterfowl meeting. They're treating eggs on Four Brother Island. about 2,000 nests on that island still. That island's owned by TNC, and the New York DEC actually does the management on that. And we currently have, those of you that know Lazy Lady or Rams Island, it's called both of those up in St. Albans Bay. We just acquired that island into state ownership a couple years ago, and that population has, on that island, has actually grown to about 300, maybe 500 nests now. So we're starting to treat there, but we have one kind of little hamstring there is we have a bald eagle's nest on there, and they're on the nest right now, so we can't disturb them or do a taking, and we've had to apply for an incidental take just in case we push them off the nest and cause them to abandon their eggs. So there's lots of conditions. We have to actually start shooting from about 600 yards out and work our way in and start to see how it affects the birds. So here's just an example back in '78. This is Young Island when they're calling out and saying, you know, we're worried about this. The gulls are there. It's opening up enough. It continued, and we had no trees. All you can see out there was a small shack and a couple of duck blinds that people had put out there. And when it's this open, this is what colonial birds like to see. They want it open where you can see predators coming, and the cormorants took advantage of that. And that island was just completely covered. If anybody, I don't know if anybody volunteered to go out with us, but we would treat this at night. So we did less disturbance when the study was going on for the PhD student. And the only way you did anything out there is you went in full rain gear and rubber boots, and you knew the birds were going to be flying. And it was a interesting location at night with headlamps. You had nothing but about 8,000 birds squawking, and you wore earplugs at times because it was so loud. It's pretty intensive. So when we removed those birds, a lot of them abandoned. And once they hit a certain level and we were able to reduce the nest, we were able to go back in and we started with just grass plantings. And that kept colonial birds from coming back that we didn't want, the cormorants, along with harassment with shell crackers. And we actually put out decoys of eagles. They're about as tall as me. And that seems to help keep cormorants off of there, but you have to move them around because they do get used to it. We started putting some more trees in there. And so we're just slowly recovering that. But if you've ever been on one of those islands, it's covered in feet of guano. And you have to make sure you test the soil, obviously, for acidity. And we didn't end up having to lime this one, unbelievably. But the soil was so dried out that it actually, if you have a 20% survival of your tree plantings, it's amazing, right? I like to have about 80%. It's just so droughty of a soil that we were dealing with. So current population, 3,000 to 4,000 nesting pairs. We don't have great numbers, or I should say we don't have a great estimate of what is actually out there. We don't have a full survey in the last couple of years. So we're estimating somewhere between 9,000 and 12,000 breeding pairs, and then also that includes non-breeders on the island. Largest colony now is on Four Brothers, with a second coming in at Lazy Lady. We do have a colony that we know is up in Quebec on Lake Memphremagog, and I don't believe the province is doing any management there, but it's also on a private island, so there's always that fun portion to deal with. It's the same with in Vermont. We cannot do work on private islands. USDA Wildlife Services can, but you have to sign a contract with them and pay them, and that could get rather expensive at times. You will see them on other large bodies in the Connecticut River. That's usually when they're migrating through, when we don't have any other colonies. And then we're probably right in the same range as we were in the early 2000s, but some of our islands we've been able to recover. And as you can see here on the bottom, nationally, we're estimating there's between 800,000, a little over 1 million in the population. One double-crested cormorants are one of, I believe it's only 6 species of cormorant. There might be 7. I'd have to go back and check that. 2 minutes more? All right, good. We're almost done. So currently we have one person that's focused on this, and that's John Gobel. We occasionally get some of our wardens out there, and on my off time, I try to get out with them too, to go out, because it's nice to have 2 people on the lake and one person working the boat and one on the island. We are going to start direct control again. Some of the unique things that we'll be doing is, once we find the eagles are tolerating us, we're allowed, I think, 800 birds removal. We're going to treat every nest that we can reach, and we actually have a portable firefighter's pump that we use to remove the nest from the trees. That's the only way you can get up into those trees. So we're trying to be a little innovative there. As I mentioned, it takes a while sometimes to get permits out of Hadley. And then we always have to worry about T&E species. And I did mention that New York is currently oiling every nest on the Four Brothers that they can reach. There are some up in the trees that they can't reach, he was telling us. And so just what's another limiting factor, and this is worked on a flyway basis. So all the biologists from Florida to Maine get together a couple times a year, and they're going over this. And we're allowed 37,000 removed from 17 states. So that's kind of a limiting factor, and you want to target. You need to be targeted in your control of what you want to manage, and you can't just randomly remove them from the lake because that isn't going to have an effect on anything that deals with habitat. And I'm just going to go back and reiterate that is habitat is what we're focusing on. It's not a population removal. And so that's a nice close-up of what we're working with. All right, anything else?
So we have a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, the question I have, I live on Willsboro Bay, and probably 10, 15 years ago, I don't know how many birds are in the bay, but it seemed like my particular bay, Frisbee Bay, it seemed like they were completely covered with the cormorants. What is that phenomenon going when all those birds are like that together? 1,000, I don't know how many birds there were there, but somebody fired a shotgun and they took off. They beat the bay to a white froth. What is the phenomenon that causes all those birds to come and to behave like that?
They found a food source, and they, as I said, they're opportunistic. If they find a spot that is heavy with food and they key in onto each other, they will come together and feed in that manner. Yep. And you are allowed to scare them off. You can't lethally take any, but you can do all the harassment you want if they're on your property. No, that was a lawsuit that happened, and what the judge determined is they didn't believe that the states and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had done enough of an assessment that the lethal take and the depredation orders weren't going to impact the population and start to decrease them to the point of concern.
Could you characterize the impact of the cormorants on the fishery? Like, how would things be different if there was no cormorants?
I'm going to turn that to the fish folks because they're the ones that do the surveys. I don't think we actually have somebody. Is that Andrew? Oh, we got a couple, but I don't think we have an answer. But I don't. Eric, any idea of populations? I don't think we've seen an impact. I wonder if we didn't have cormorants, would that change anything with our fisheries population in the lakes?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I mean, David said cormorants are mostly smaller fish. Originally, we eat a lot of yellow perch, small yellow perch. Now, we switched over to eating a lot of alewives. I don't think they're eliminating the alewive population by any means, but we have had some general concerns just about total biomass being removed from the lake by cormorants and whether that could affect overall productivity of the lake. We don't have a specific answer, but that's been part of our concern.
So continuing on, I'm going to present today on lake trout management. Bernie Pianska was unable to join us today, so you get me. So just a quick introduction for everybody. Lake Champlain did support an indigenous population of lake trout during early settlement, but they were rapidly depleted as development progressed and were extirpated by 1900. During the late 1950s, New York and Vermont started stocking lake trout, with annual stocking starting in the mid-70s, with a goal of reestablishing a lake trout fishery. Sea lamprey control started in the 1990s to try to reduce that lake trout mortality. And UVM researchers documented fish spawning and viable eggs in the early 2000s, but there was lack of recruitment until 2015, when 4-year classes of wild fish were collected. The percentage of wild fish in sampling since 2015 has continued to increase, providing evidence of successful recruitment beyond that first year. Vermont Fish and Wildlife started gill netting in the summer of 2020 to help assess natural recruitment and gain a better understanding of why we still weren't seeing wild spawners in our fall assessments. We did find wild fish in these gill net assessments. As you can see in the plots here, those red bars are those unclipped fish. And the percentage did increase annually, resulting in 2 stocking reductions in the past 3 years. I'm going to describe some of the data from the past 5 years and how they highlight a success story for this iconic species, and how Management Cooperative was able to respond timely to data as it was collected and to make these applied management decisions. We have been conducting assessments on lake trout to better understand recruitment and how it may be impacting stocking. This includes using trawling for juveniles, summer gill netting, and these fall spawning assessments. These efforts provide data on a range of lake trout age classes from juveniles to adults. We can then use the data to assess catch rates, percentage wild in the different age classes, and to evaluate trends over time. These data are then applied to make management decisions. As I mentioned, summer gill netting was added in 2020 to allow us to assess lake trout and to try to understand why we weren't seeing more wild fish in our fall spawning assessments. We did know there was successful recruitment of wild lake trout since 2012, and we expected to start seeing them by 2019 in those fall spawning assessments, but they still weren't showing up. The combined stack bars here indicate the overall catch per unit effort of lake trout, with wild fish in the black bars and stocked fish in the gray. In 2020, we were excited to see more wild fish, and the proportion of wild fish has increased every year since. You will see a slight decline in the overall catch per unit effort in 2024, while the wild fish continued their increasing trend. The stocked fish seem to have a bigger decline than the prior years. Right now, it's unclear what is causing this, whether it's simple normal variation or potentially the reduction in stocking over those last few years that now are affecting the numbers of stocked fish out there. Again, with the summer gill nets, the lake trout collected age was estimated using the maxillary bone. We're still processing 2024, so I'm only showing 2020 to 2023 here. The wild fish in the left plot, if you focus on the younger groups, we see increasing numbers of 4 to 8 year olds. Overall, the age structure of wild fish is developing, and as we collect more wild fish, we'll need to continue to watch this into the future. For the stocked fish, we see ages ranging from 1 to 19, while the age structure for 2020 to 2022 is generally similar. The pattern in 2023 seems to be a little more constricted. There were no young fish, those ages 1 to 2, and no fish greater than age 14 collected. For the young fish, again, the stocking changes may account for that lack of fish, but it's unclear why we weren't seeing those older fish. The data in 2024 are being evaluated now, and hopefully will help us to understand if this is just an anomaly or a new trend we're seeing. One of the other variables we track to help inform us of the overall population status is condition factor. This is an important variable that provides information on the plumpness of each individual. A lower condition factor indicates a skinny fish, whereas a higher condition factor indicates a plump fish, with a break point at about 0.8, where you see that dotted line. From 2020 to 2024, lake trout condition factor from those summer gill nets has decreased, with many more above the 0.8 line in 2020, that top plot, compared to 2024 in the bottom, in both the wild and the stocked fish. And I have those, the wild and stocked. The clip is actually the stocked. Sorry, I have those backwards up there. In 2024, there were more fish that were skinny for their length. So just a quick look here. So these are actually the stocked fish. If you kind of follow the number of fish that are on the right side of this dotted line, you see a lot fewer on the right and more on the left, which indicates a lot more skinny fish. Similar for the wild, not quite as dramatic though. So this was clearly observed during the sample collection in 2024, which resulted in an almost immediate analysis of the data. And I'll highlight that this type of observation and the subsequent data analysis shows the dedication of our biologists out there and helped us to understand the data to make some rapid decisions. I would like to personally point out Bernie Piantka and Mark Henderson, who headed up this effort to get these data analyzed and in front of the technical committee by August of last summer. So pretty impressive and a big push just because the concern Bernie was seeing out there in the field. Moving over to juvenile trawling assessments, we have been continuing these as they're important for us to assess the wild reproduction and identify if any age classes are missing and if management changes may be necessary. Sampling from Burlington Bay since 2016 shows the catch per unit effort of wild juvenile lake trout ages 2 and 3 have been increasing. The highest rates were seen in 2024, which suggests that wild reproduction is continuing. And I will note that the age 2 is the most definitive. They are fully recruited to the gear, which means that gear is really good at catching those 2-year-old fish. Lake trout spawning surveys have been conducted since the early 1990s in both Whalen Bay and Willsboro Bay in New York and at Hatchery Cove in Vermont to assess the size structure, lamprey wounding, and evidence of natural reproduction. All stocked fish are fin clipped using a 5-year rotation of clips so that we can identify them. The management cooperative developed indicators in 2018 to identify metrics to be used to determine if a management action needs to be taken. One of these is the assessment of the percent wild lake trout to evaluate when stocking changes may be needed to maintain that balance of predator and prey. The metric assessed is the proportion of unclipped lake trout among those in the same size range as those with fin clips that correspond to the age 4 and 5-year-olds in those fall spawning surveys. If more than 15% are unclipped, we'd reduce stocking by 25%, and if 25%, we would reduce stocking by 50%. Sorry, a lot of different percentages there. The overall percentage across those fall assessments indicate that the percent unclipped has been rising since 2019, and in 2021 neared that first indicator, that pink line on the bottom, and in 2022 exceeded the second indicator. Based on these data, we did make stocking reductions in both 2022 and then in 2024. So we went to that 25% reduction and then a 50% reduction. I don't think anyone expected these indicators to be reached quite so quickly when they were developed, as when these were developed, there was really no evidence of successful recruitment. So this is a huge success story. And in the fall of 2024, we saw the highest percentage of unclipped fish from these surveys. The other indicators developed for lake trout in 2018 are highlighted with the bullseye symbol indicating it was within the target range, and arrows indicated if it was above or below that target range. In 2024, all 4 indicators were outside the target range, with all indicating an overall decline in condition and sea lamprey wounding rates still higher than we would like. They were similar in both 2023 and 24 at about 38 to 40%. We've drafted new indicators to assess wild juvenile recruitment to allow us to continue to track this over time. If changes occur, we'll be able to identify it early and make management decisions. So those are still drafted, yet to be kind of formalized. So we'll hopefully report on those next year for you all. So in summary, with the increasing number of skinny fish and multiple year classes of wild fish observed in the juvenile trawling, the decision was made last fall to end stocking following this spring's stocking. So as of 2026, there will be no more lake trout stocking. This is a huge success story. By eliminating stocking, we're hoping to maintain that predator-prey balance in the lake, and we're going to continue to evaluate if additional management actions will be needed. We'll continue in 2025 to assess lake trout populations and evaluate the relative numbers of wild fish compared to stocked fish throughout those various surveys. In addition, the members of the Fisheries Technical Committee are working to develop a salmonid management plan to help guide our management of the lake over the next 10 years. We expect that to be completed later this year. And with that, I will take any questions. I know that was a lot in 10 minutes. That's correct. It's for the whole lake. Shawn, we had one up.
Are there any management actions other than stopping rate? I mean, when you say management actions, is there anything other than stopping?
Well, so, I mean, we're going to continue the sea lamprey control. I think that's an important measure to take.
Okay.
We'll be looking at the other salmonid species to look at potential reductions in some of those if needed, if we're seeing more evidence of poor condition beyond just the lake trout. Lake trout are longer lived, so they're a little bit more of the kind of the canary in the coal mine for longer term. A couple back.
Will you be able to shift resources depending on the species if you don't stop lake trout anymore?
Likely not. That would probably be for Kevin to answer, wherever.
We are using one of the lake trout raceways this year. We had a request from the Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to grow an additional 9,000 to 10,000 more salmon. So we're going to use the raceway for that. For lake trout. Yeah, some short haul.
Lamprey, the lake trout condition has been decreasing as a result of lamprey predation or forage base or some other issue?
It's hard to say. I mean, it doesn't seem to be lamprey wounding that has really kind of, it's generally overall declining. If you look at a longer term trend, we got below 25%, 25 wounds per 100 fish 2 years ago. And now we're at 38 for 2024. I'm not certain. I don't know if anyone else out there with lamprey knowledge. I don't think that's what's causing poor condition.
How about forage?
Forage potentially. We're looking at that.
What would that be?
Alewife, rainbow smelt are the two big ones.
And what's happening to those populations?
We're trying to understand. We have not had a good forage fish assessment in several years, so that's one of the things we're starting to pick up to look at to try to understand if that's changing.
Like based on the analysis that Bernie and I did, it's almost certainly not lamprey. But indications are that it's probably more forage based, but we're still looking into that in more detail. So those results are probably yet to come.
All right, thanks. Sorry, we can now, we'll have a bigger session at the end, but we do have to move on. Our next speaker is Heim with the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, I'm up. Hi everyone, my name's Kurt with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm out of the Essex Junction office, and I have the privilege of spending most of my time working on landlocked Atlantic salmon restoration in Lake Champlain. So I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about the history of these fish in Champlain. So if we were to go back a really long time ago, Lake Champlain was actually the Champlain Sea. And at this time, along with beluga whales, sea-run Atlantic salmon were roaming around in the Champlain Sea. As glaciers receded and salt waters of the Champlain Sea kind of ran out and Lake Champlain was formed, it became entirely freshwater. But salmon stuck around, and in this period of 10,000 years, they evolved a life history to persist entirely in fresh water. So they have the same life history as sea-run Atlantic salmon, except instead of going out to the ocean to attain their adult size, they went to Lake Champlain. And so we can only really imagine what these populations looked like during this time, and only imagine how important they were for Native Americans living in the Champlain Basin. The first records that we have of salmon in Champlain rivers come from letters and writings during the European settlement of North America and the American Revolutionary War. But we know there are a lot of salmon. When folks first started writing about them, in 1776, a fisherman named William Gilliland complimented the American Army with 1,500 salmon. So this same fisherman gave Benedict Arnold himself 75 salmon as a gift during the Revolutionary War. and it was a common pastime to drive a team of horses into some of the shallow tributaries of the river, and from the wagon spear the salmon with pitchforks, and thus obtain in a few minutes all the fish needed for consumption. So there were a lot of salmon back in the day. And I don't know about you, but that sounds like a lot of fun. And sometimes I really wish I could go back 500 years with my fly rod and just to experience what this would have been like. But unfortunately, like lake trout, Atlantic salmon were completely extirpated from Lake Champlain by the 1830s. This was mostly due to dam construction on both the smaller spawning tributaries as well as main stems of larger rivers like the Saranac. So spawning habitat was lost, habitat was changed, and there was continued overharvest of the species. So the unique evolutionary lineage of the Lake Champlain salmon disappeared. So efforts began to stock salmon in the 1970s by the Lake Champlain Fish and Wildlife Cooperative. And so that's kind of the same framework that we're working under today. In the most recent strategic plan, goals related to salmon include maintaining a quality recreational fishery while striving to increase the number of wild fish in the population. So to achieve these goals, this cooperative of state and federal agencies stocks fish, about 300,000 salmon stocked annually. And we work to do applied research to improve the performance of hatchery fish. And we do sea lamprey control, which you'll hear about from Steve in a little bit. To restore natural reproduction, we do assessments of adult returns and spawning success. We continue to conduct applied research to understand bottlenecks to natural reproduction and to come up with strategies to overcome those bottlenecks. And we do habitat restoration and fish passage work, which you'll hear a little bit about from Dave Minkoff. So I'm going to just highlight some of our successes and some of the activities that we're doing, and some of the new things we're learning with new methods we've been able to apply in the last couple of years. So I want to highlight some of the work that's been done to improve hatchery practices. So Ed Weed Fish Culture Station annually stocks 150,000 salmon smolts. These smolts are marked with a rotational fin clip. So they'll have a left ventral, right ventral, or adipose fin clip. So that's how you can tell it's an Ed Weed salmon. But work that was done about 10 years ago now, maybe more than that, was determining which broodstock source was the best, produced the best adult returns. So this hatchery has two options for broodstock. They can use adults returning to their hatchery. They return to this little brook that is outflow from the hatchery. So they can use those adults to produce the next generation. So they call that the feral return program. They could also use a captive broodstock that lives its entire life within a hatchery setting. So the question is, well, is there a performance difference between these two broodstocks? So here's the hatchery brook trap return numbers. So you can see that they've had as many as 1,500 fish, but it fluctuates, right? Depending on conditions within the lake. And in 2024, they had 268, I believe, fish returning that were used for broodstock. But so they did this study with paired releases, releasing half smolts from two origins and compared adult returns. And they found that the feral broodstock produced 250% increase in returns compared to the domestic or captive broodstock. So that's a huge thing to know when you're deciding what broodstock to be using moving forward. So the natural outcome of this is that now this hatchery system maximizes use of feral fish for broodstock. So a really great example of applied research to guide decisions on hatchery management moving forward. There was a similar study done at Eisenhower National Fish Hatchery. This hatchery produces 140,000 smolts annually. They're currently marking all their fish with a genetic tagging approach, so they'll have no external fin clips. But a few years back, they did a study where they tested different water sources. So they could grow their smolts in raceways with stream water that has variable temperature. It's really cold in the winter, but it's a natural thermal regime for these smolts. And they also had access to groundwater. So the question here was, what water source produces the smolts with the best return rates? So a similar paired release study found that using surface water or water from the stream increased adult return rates by 286% over the 3 years of this study. So again, a really useful study to guide the use of hatchery resources moving forward. You know, something as simple as switching it to surface water versus well water can have a huge difference in the performance of the fish. This study was the first one, I believe, in Champlain that used this genetic marking approach to tag fish. So in this study, their paired release, the two different groups, the surface water and well water, were marked with a genetic approach. And the success of that really led to pursuing this further. So now at White River National Fish Hatchery, this is a broodstock facility. They've gone full in with this genetic tagging method. That's called parentage-based tagging. And just to explain briefly how this works, at the time that fish are spawned, you collect a genetic sample from the parents. So you're creating a single parent, one male, one female cross. And with those genetic samples, you can organize their offspring into different release groups. So you now know who all the parents are for each of this distinct release groups, so that any recaptured fish, whether it's in Lake Champlain or returning to a river, you can determine who the parents are and kind of read the tag to determine which release group it's in. So the advantage of this is that you don't need to clip the fish, and you're also not limited to just 2 or 3 study groups. So currently they're producing 18 distinct experimental study groups that are being released annually into Lake Champlain. These include groups that are fry, smolts, 2 different brood stocks, and fish stocked at various locations, so that we can assess the performance of these different release groups simultaneously by looking at who shows up in the lake and who returns to rivers. What are their stocking origin? So I'll highlight one kind of new result that I don't think I've shared yet with a lot of folks, but we have now these initial genetic tagging returns, and I'm going to share results on the stocking river origin of fish caught within the main lake. So for background, roughly equal numbers of these genetically marked smolts are stocked in the Winooski, Saranac, and Balk rivers. In 2019, I had 219 fin clips submitted by anglers. So we genotyped them, assigned these fish to river of origin to say, okay, where are these fish coming from? And the result was really incredible. So even though there are roughly equal numbers released in these 3 rivers, the catch was entirely dominated by fish that were stocked in the Saranac River. So way disproportionate returns relative to how many were released in that river. And so this was consistent when we looked at this with additional data collected by nearshore e-fishing. So in each year, if you're looking at who's being caught in the main lake, 81, 72, 73% of these fish were stocked in the Saranac River. So that was a big surprise and really, intriguing. It makes you wonder what's going on in the Saranac and maybe what's not going on in the Balk and the Winooski. So what is going on in the Saranac? Well, we do have a net pen rearing project here. So this is an experimental study where we're stocking fish into net pens to see if net pen rearing for 3 weeks helps improve smolt performance. So after 3 weeks, you open the nets and let them swim away. So this gives these hatchery fish a time to imprint to the water and also learn how to be fish outside of a hatchery setting. And so this is another study that's using the genetic marking approach, and we're doing paired releases of 25,000 smolts in the river, 25,000 in the net pens. And to learn about the performance of these, we established different adult netting programs. So we use hoop nets and gill nets in the river to collect returning adults, but we've also engaged anglers to help collect samples for us, because all you need is a little fin clip, and we could do the genetic analysis to determine the origin of that fish. So I want to highlight, we've been able to get lots of fish with our netting annually, but we're seeing increase in contributions of anglers to these studies. So in 2024, the anglers submitted almost more data than we were able to collect ourselves. So a huge shout out to the folks participating and sending in these fin clips. But I also want to highlight that our netting efficiency is extremely low in the Saranac. So we're only catching likely around 5% of the total spawning run. So how big is this spawning run actually? I did some preliminary mark recapture modeling, and these are the numbers you get when you turn those raw catch numbers into run size estimates. And so this is a big run coming back to the Saranac River. So anywhere from 1,300 to 1,900 fish are likely coming back to the Saranac River. So these are preliminary estimates that need a little bit of tweaking to validate them, but they don't surprise me given how many fish we've been seeing in recent years. So is it because of the net pen is the big question driving this. And unfortunately, preliminary results suggest it is not due to the net pen. In 2022, when we did this genetic analysis, 60% of the fish coming back were river stock origin versus 40% coming back from net pen. In 2023, it was 56 river and 44% net pen. So unfortunately, it's not looking like the net pen project is increasing adult return rates. But I want to stress these are preliminary results. We still have a few more years of data to collect here and some more sophisticated analysis other than just bar charts to come to a final conclusion about this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about natural reproduction. In 2016, wild Atlantic salmon were first discovered in the Balk and Saranac River and confirmed as wild. So that was a huge milestone. It was the first time that wild salmon had been identified in Lake Champlain since the 1800s when they were extirpated. So this exciting news kind of led us to focus a bit more on this idea of trying to restore natural reproduction. The strategic plan targets the Balk, Winooski, and Saranac River as locations where we want to target some degree of natural reproduction. And the first target there is to achieve run sizes of greater than 150 adults. You need enough adults coming back to the river to support natural reproduction. So we've generally achieved that on the Saranac and the Balk rivers over the last 4 years. So like I mentioned, the Saranac, the Balk, these are population estimates, about 160 to about 500 fish coming back each year. And we're getting there on the Winooski. So I'm going to show the Winooski River has a mechanical fish lift at Winooski 1. So here's the full time series of the number of fish coming back to the Winooski River. So they're caught at a dam and then transported upstream for spawning. I'm going to put our 150 target on there. You notice that over the last 29 years, we've achieved that goal twice, but we've achieved it in 2 of the last 5 years, with record returns coming back to the Winooski in 2023 and in 2024. I could talk all day about this, but this is likely due to kind of shifting stocking locations around based on the results of some telemetry studies. So we're really trying to trick the birds in the Winooski. We noticed that a lot of our smolts were getting eaten by gulls and cormorants at the time of stocking. So we've kind of moved things around a bit to try and slide these smolts in under the bird's radar.
Coordinates with big flood years.
The high numbers do?
210 and 211 were big flood years.
Yeah, that is
And 23, 24 were big flood years.
is very possible. High flows during stocking give those smolts protection as they're, we stock them up in the river. So if they're riding it out with dirty water, they have better survival to the lake. So that certainly could be it. As opposed to extremely low water and clear water, it's a lot easier for them to get picked off by birds. So we're also doing red surveys as part of actions under the strategic plan. So we go out each fall in the Winooski and the Balk, and we look for reds. Here's a huge salmon red. This is in the Huntington River. We found it this fall. There's Frankie, pretty excited to see such a beautiful red. And this is a picture of a pair of salmon that we saw spawning in the upper Balk River, about 35 miles upstream from the mouth. So this is really exciting to see these fish coming all the way back up the Balk River and spawning. So this is our red survey results the last couple years. We consistently find a lot of reds in the Balk. and some in the Winooski, and we've just started doing red surveys in the Saranac, and this year we found 22. And we've been sampling wild fry. So over this time period, we've caught 546 wild fry in the Boquete River. We've had a really hard time catching them in the Winooski, mostly due to high water, and it's just difficult to sample there. And in 2024, we caught 4 potentially wild fry in the Saranac River, which, if confirmed with genetic analysis, would represent the first detection of wild fry in the Saranac since the 1800s. So that'd be an exciting discovery. And we hope to be able to identify wild adults. It's likely that some fish returning are wild adults, but we haven't had the tools to identify them. So now with this genetic tagging program, if adults are coming back that are truly wild fish, we'll be able to identify them. And so I hope to next year be able to say we've detected wild adult fish returning to rivers. So just to conclude, I hope that you can see how some of this applied research is really helping to improve adult returns, especially in a hatchery setting. Understanding what's working and what's not really provides more efficiency moving forward. Parentage-based tagging is now online and working, and it's starting to provide new insights. For example, what's going on in the Saranac River. I think we have a lot to learn in the next couple years as we continue to use these methods. We've continued to see wild reproduction. It's happening, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I want to thank all the anglers who've been able to contribute samples. It's been really helpful to have, especially within Lake Champlain, where it's really hard for the agencies to collect samples. And that being said, I want to just leave my contact information up here. So if anyone's out there catching salmon, it'd be great to get samples from you. And I'll leave it at that. I probably talked for too long.
We have time for a couple questions.
I spoke with you, it was probably last summer, midsummer. What strain are the salmon not clipping?
So all the fish from White River and Eisenhower are not being clipped. And those they're an offshoot of the feral fish from Ed Weed. So we have 2 captive lines that are experimental. One has higher genetic diversity, and one is a potentially thiamine deficiency tolerant group of fish. I didn't dive into that with the time I had here, but so the strain are originally they're Sebago, came from Ed Weed, and are now at White River. It could be wild, or it could be stocked by Fish and Wildlife Service hatcheries, because we have.
If it's not, that'd be a great one if you get a sample of it.
Yeah, I'd like, if you're out fishing, I'd like any sample of a salmon, whether it's clipped or not. But yeah, with the non-clipped ones, we'd be able to look and see if that's a wild one or a Fish and Wildlife Service fish.
Next up, we have Kurt Heim that'll be continuing our Atlantic salmon.
I wish I was.
Graham, sorry. Graham Montague, sorry.
I'm trying, it's okay.
We just had Kurt.
Honestly, I
It's
wish I was
Graham,
Kurt, so. Yeah, right? He's the better half. All right, cool. So thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate everybody coming out on a Saturday. I'm Graham, a PhD student, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about some preliminary results that we started with a pilot project back in the spring of 2024 on the movement of some hatchery-raised landlocked Atlantic salmon smolts. I just first like to thank my co-authors, Lori and Kurt, who are here with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Bernie, Margaret, Paige, and Kevin with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, and then also my advisor, Mark Henderson, with the co-op unit. We have a great group of people working together, really smart people, a lot of great scientists. So hopefully we can help better manage the salmon population in the lake. Just a couple quick more acknowledgements. University of Vermont Cooperative Unit, the Rubenstein Lab people with UVM, especially Ellen and Matt, they helped me out a lot with acoustic telemetry stuff. The Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, obviously, and then also the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for funding this project. And I also like to give a shout out to the anglers. I'm not sure if I see Ron Winter here, but he was super helpful. And Ron Winter and a bunch of other people helped me out in the fall. This is not I'm not going to be presenting on results of that tagging data, but they helped me tag some Lake Age 0 Atlantic salmon. So thank you so much. I'm really excited to work with all you anglers in the future. You guys have been super awesome, and just this collaborative research with the scientists and the anglers and the angling community is, we can do a lot of cool things together. So I'm excited about the work we've done. I'm excited about our future work too. All right, getting into it. So Kurt gave a really good background of the history of the landlocked Atlantic salmon in Lake Champlain, but quickly again, extirpated in the 1800s through a bunch of anthropogenic effects, overfishing, habitat loss, and degradation. So we began our reintroduction efforts in the 1970s, where we began stocking Atlantic salmon to establish that recreational fishery. So if we look just at some stocking locations from Ed Weed Hatchery, we have lake-wide stocking locations. So throughout the unique basins of Lake Champlain, these fish are stocked. So we do have the unique basins that have varying productivity levels with them, and then also varying forage fish assemblages and fish communities. So this really kind of led us to our question of this pilot project. Was we wanted to compare the stocking success by examining the Atlantic salmon smolt survival and their movement patterns based on different release locations. For this pilot project, we're looking at 3 different locations: in the Missisquoi River, Memorial River, and then also off of the Charlotte Ferry. All right, so we're going to be using acoustic telemetry to track the movements of these fish. And just a quick basic, I guess this figure will kind of show you what acoustic telemetry kind of is. So we have receivers positioned lake-wide. We have roughly 60 of them positioned throughout the lake, and they're constantly listening for pinging salmon. So we surgically implant these acoustic tags. They're sending out a unique signal that has a unique code for each of these fish. So our salmon, they have these tags implanted in them. They're sending out a signal. That signal gets emitted and then stored in the receiver, and that receiver then gets downloaded yearly. So we go back out, collect these receivers yearly, and then get the movement data to track these fish. So like I said, we have an existing receiver array. It's called the CATOS receiver array, so Lake Champlain Acoustic Telemetry Observational System. And then the red dots are where the receivers are positioned right now. So they're fishing right now. We're listening for salmon that are tagged, and also other fish. So lake sturgeon, I think, are tagged. And we used to, Matthew did lake trout also. That work is actually finished up. So for our pilot project in the spring of 2024, we tagged 50 Atlantic salmon smolts at Ed Weed Hatchery. And we released those at the 3 stocking locations, like I said before. They're tagged with VA tags. So these are pretty small tags. They have a battery life of 400 days. So we could track these a little over a year. So right now, the fish that we stocked, again, last year, are still emitting a ping. So we're still tracking the movements of these fish, which is cool. And then we also, since this is the first acoustic telemetry study of Atlantic salmon in Lake Champlain, we wanted to look at the post-tagging survival to make sure we weren't killing the fish and these fish were happy and healthy once we released them. So we held them for 30 days in Ed Weed outdoor hatchery raceways. Found 100% post-tagging survival. So we're really excited. All these fish were happy and healthy when we actually stocked them, which is good. All right, so now moving on to some preliminary data. I know this is a lot, but let's try to break it down. So we're able to visualize just preliminary movement data with abacus plots. So that's the figure with all the points. And each detection is a detection for that day. So on the x-axis, you have your date, and then on the y-axis, you have all the transmitters that we actually tagged. And then these are based and grouped by the stocking location. So you have the Missisquoi River, which is a river stocking location way up north. And then we have the Lamoille River, stocked in Mount's Bay in the Lamoille. And then also we stocked at the Charlotte Ferry. So this is the open water, main water stocking location, a little different than our 2 river stocking locations. All right, moving on to some results. Again, the abacus plot is just the detections. And then also I made a map, and the purple dots signify the number of detections. So the bigger the circle, the more detections are where these fish are actually getting detected. In the smaller circle, the less number of detections. So out of the Missisquoi River, we were able to detect 14 out of the 15 tagged salmon. And again, this is just preliminary data. So this is our first data download that we download in the summer of 2024. We're going to get more of a holistic view of what these fish did. But again, this is just cool preliminary movement data. So the majority of the fish were detected at receivers really close to the mouth of the river where they were stocked. Few fish made interbasin movements also. So some of them moved down south and even were detected down by the Sandbar Causeway, which is kind of cool. But for the most part, pretty low number of detections compared to the other stocking locations. For the Lamoille River, again, these fish were stocked within the river and in Mallett's Bay, and they all pretty much stayed in Mallett's Bay. There was no interbasin movements of these fish. They stayed really close to their stocking location. You can see that the circle around stocking location, that triangle, many of the fish got detected on that receiver. And then finally, our main lake stocking off the Charlotte Ferry. You can see the triangle is the stocking location, and then you can see there's big circles around Whalen and Willsboro Bay. Many of the smolts were being detected there. We did find the highest number of detections from these stocked fish also, which is interesting, but no interbasin movements. So in general, they stayed pretty close to the stocking location. They didn't move up to Mallett's Bay or in the inland sea or anything like that. So generally, they stayed pretty close together. We're also curious, there are some detections up getting close to Colchester Causeway, kind of up north, and we were curious just to see like if that was individual fish or if that was like a collective group of fish. So we looked at the distance of individual fish from the release site. So on the x-axis of these, you have just the date, so April to August for the months, and then the y-axis is the distance from the release site. In general, these lines are pretty, they don't have any high peaks, meaning that they stayed pretty close to their stocking location for the Charlotte Ferry fish. For an exception, we have AS028, which made a lot of different movements. And this was, again, kind of the exception of the group. So it kind of led us the question what that fish was actually doing, if that was a real salmon that was moving around or potentially it got predated on by like a lake trout. So everyone loves a good animation. So this is an animation of that fish. So AS28, again, stocked off the ferry. And you can see that it's moving all throughout kind of the main lake basin, moving all these crazy movements. It may be a salmon, but it's most probably likely got predated on by a lake trout. So for the conclusions of this pilot project, this is the first Lake Champlain Atlantic salmon acoustic telemetry study. We're super excited about future research that we're going to utilize with the acoustic telemetry, but we're also excited about these preliminary results. It's going to give us some good management implications moving forward. We found that the main lake had the highest number of detections compared to the river stocking locations, which was interesting. And also the Missisquoi River is a high management concern, especially with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, because we do see low returns of adult salmon to the Missisquoi River. This is kind of reinforced with our low detections that we're seeing with our smolts. We may need to reconsider this as a stocking location moving forward. But yeah, additional information to get that holistic picture of the whole year of those tags is going to be important. And then finally, we saw very minimal interbasin movements. Generally, these fish stayed pretty close to their stocking location. So for our future research, like I said, in the fall of 2024, you all anglers helped out tremendously, tag 30 Lake H0 salmon. So these are salmon that were stocked in the spring and survived a little bit throughout the summer and survived to the fall. So these are a little bit bigger. We tagged these with V13 tags. And these have a battery life of around 2.5 years. So we'll get some really cool movement data from those fish also. Here's just a couple of pictures of some Lake H0s that we were tagging. And then in the spring of 2025, so this spring, actually coming up in the next couple weeks, we'll be tagging additional salmon smolts and increasing our stocking locations also. We'll keep the Edweed stocking locations, so Missisquoi River, Lamoille River, and then also off of the Charlotte Ferry. But we're going to increase our stocking locations to the Winooski, the Bocat, and the Saranac with Dwight T. Eisenhower stocked Atlantic salmon smolts. And then also in the summer and the fall of 2025, again, another data download. So we're really excited about that download. We're going to get hopefully a lot of good detections and a lot of good movements on these. And then we're going to tag additional Lake H0s in the fall. So again, we might be recruiting more anglers to help me out collect some fish and tag those fish in the future. So again, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate this collaborative effort. And it's cool to kind of share some research to the people that love using the resource. So thank you so much, and I'll take some questions.
We have time for a couple questions.
Yeah. Sorry, hand.
And your surgery skills to work with you on the inland sea.
Yeah.
Do all those.
Heck yeah. Yeah, I remember you guys. Thank you.
Do you have
Yeah,
any
so-
idea how those fish are doing? Are they?
We don't have any idea yet, unfortunately. We'll get a great picture of. I know we have receivers positioned in that inland sea sandbar area that I know we're gonna get some awesome preliminary movement stuff on those. Fingers crossed they all survive, but they all look happy and healthy. They all look really good. So I appreciate you guys' help big time.
Are you gonna be planning any more transmitters this coming year?
Yes, in the fall of this upcoming fall, so 2025. Yep, we're gonna be doing the same exact thing. Hopefully we can get a better spatial distribution of those tags. So we tag a lot in the inland sea. So if you guys can maybe get me on some fish not in the inland sea, like that would be really cool.
We got trailers.
There we go. Perfect.
Tell us where.
If you're going fishing, I'll be there. So
Because
it's gonna be awesome. Yeah.
Describe the implementation procedure.
Yeah. So we anesthetize the fish using clove oil, it's aqueous, and that pretty much knocks the fish out. And it's just like any other surgery when you anesthetize someone. You make a small incision just big enough for the transmitter. You implant that, and everything is sterilized, the antiseptic and everything. You implant that receiver, and then you use sutures. So simple
abdominally, or is it subcutaneous?
Yeah. In along the midline of the abdominal cavity.
Okay.
And then so you make that incision, make sure you're not hitting any internal organs or anything like that. Implant it, do a couple sutures, and that fish is pretty much good. And then it revives from the anesthetic and happy and healthy.
Next up, we have Shelby Scarfo, a graduate student at UVM.
Awesome. Thanks, Margaret. Right, so as Margaret said, I'm a master's student at the University of Vermont, and today I'll be talking about the development of forage fish surveys in Lake Champlain. Okay, so this is review for, I'm guessing, every single person in this room, but there are two native salmonid predators in Lake Champlain, the landlocked Atlantic salmon and lake trout. Historically, both of these species has been heavily stocked by management agencies up until recently, where there has been significant evidence of natural recruitment in lake trout, leading to stocking reductions and eventually the discontinuation of stocking. But there are also other really important predators throughout the lake, including burbot and walleye, which is a cool water species. And many of these predators in the lake are supported by 4 prey or forage fish species, which are non-native alewife and then native rainbow smelt, slimy sculpin, and trout perch. So again, probably pretty obvious for a lot of people in this room, but why do we care about forage fish? Well, they're an early indicator for predator condition. And as Lake Champlain has an increasing predator population with our wild lake trout, it's really easy for our lake trout to go from this nice, beautiful, big one here on the left to skinny ones that we've been seeing recently. So some really important events have happened in the past few decades in Lake Champlain. Due to success with the sea lamprey control program, biologists and managers became increasingly concerned about additional pressure on the forage base due to increased predator survival. So in 1990, Vermont Fish Wildlife Department began a midwater forage fish trawling survey. In 2003, alewife were discovered in Missisquoi Bay. 2005, Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department added hydroacoustics to their forage fish survey. In 2008, they added floating gillnets to their survey in order to sample the alewife population in the lake. And then in 2014, spiny water flea were found throughout Lake Champlain, which had a significant impact on the native zooplankton populations within the lake. And then 2 things happened in 2015. Vermont Fish and Wildlife canceled their forage fish survey, and there was also evidence of lake trout natural recruitment found by UVM researchers. So from 2016 to 2023, there was no forage fish survey data collected throughout Lake Champlain. However, in 2024, UVM researchers began developing a forage fish bottom trawling survey. And biologists from Vermont Fish and Wildlife and researchers from UVM were actually able to replicate the original Vermont Fish and Wildlife forage fish survey. So, breaking down the original forage fish survey design had three really important components. So we had a stepped oblique midwater trawl, which surveyed primarily rainbow smelt between 35 meters and 10 meters. And then there was also hydroacoustics that were essentially scanning down into the lake, and those captured rainbow smelt and alewife. And then also there were floating gill nets that were positioned in the upper 6 meters of the water column, which targeted alewife. So we have a map here. So our yellow kind of zigzag here shows the acoustic trawls, or toes, I should say, and then trawls. And then the orange bars here are the stepped oblique midwater trawl locations. So it's a very comprehensive survey throughout the different portions of the lake. And so through this survey, biologists from Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department were able to look at different metrics, including catch per unit effort. So essentially how many fish were caught within a standard unit of time. They were also able to look at things like age composition and seeing if, for example here, rainbow smelt, if the composition of ages changed from year to year, if we're seeing more older fish or fewer older fish, that could be an indicator of, predation or issues with recruitment to the population. With echograms such as this that were collected through the hydroacoustic surveys, biomass estimates can be collected, so the weight of fish in that given area. But they can also combine information like length and age data to get something like a mean length and age information. And so, like I mentioned, in 2024, Vermont Fish and Wildlife biologists and UVM researchers were able to replicate the original survey. And so it was kind of a slimmed down version of the original one. So the main lake portion of Lake Champlain was sampled. The white kind of zigzag there is the hydroacoustics. And then the orange bars are the midwater trawling areas, and the little pink dots that you may or may not see there are the floating gill nets. And so this was really important because it gave biologists the ability to directly compare data collected from the 1990 to 2015 survey to a point in time in 2024. And now so we can compare a little bit the Vermont Fish and Wildlife trawling survey to the UVM trawling survey being developed. So obviously, like I said earlier, the Vermont Fish and Wildlife survey was a midwater trawling survey. It was conducted during late June to mid-August at night. And it was primarily designed to target smelt. So originally, that was the primary forage species in the lake. And like I said, depths between 10 and 35 meters are being sampled. And each trawl was about 55 minutes total. 5 locations were sampled throughout the lake, as seen here with the orange bars. And then the new UVM trawling survey is a bottom trawling survey conducted in early April to mid-May, as soon as the lake is clear of ice. And it is conducted during the day when fish are close to the bottom. And it is designed to capture the 4 primary species discussed earlier. So these, the sampling occurs between 20 and 90 meters at 10 meter depth increments. So only one depth strata is sampled at a time. So if we drop the net down to 20 meters, we just sample 20 meters for 10 minutes. So again, 10 minutes. And we added and rearranged a few trawling locations. So we have 7 locations as seen here. So from this bottom trawling data, we can collect a lot of really great information that can be used to guide management stocking decisions. Just from counting fish that we collect in the trawl, we can get abundance or catch per unit effort. We can also weigh the catch that we get and get biomass in terms of kilograms per hectare trawled. And then we can combine these things like length and age, similar to what Vermont Fish and Wildlife biologists did, and get year class strength, age distribution, and length and age information. Finally, we can do a little bit of math and look at condition of these fish and just see how robust they are. So only one season of bottom trawling has happened so far. Another season will be coming up in a matter of weeks, actually. But just looking at some preliminary data, just to orient you. So the blue colors here on the left side of the map indicate the north, central, and south portions of the main lake, whereas the orange is the inland sea and yellow is Mallett's Bay. And across the top, we have the 4 forage fish species we're looking at. And so this figure is talking about essentially, it's a length distribution. And we're seeing, throughout the different basins, pretty similar distributions of lengths. However, interesting, Mallett's Bay rainbow smelt are a lot bigger, or some of them are a lot bigger than what we're seeing in a few of the other basins throughout the lake. So if we look at fish condition as well, pretty uniform across the board in all the different basins. However, again, rainbow smelt in Mallett's Bay are just a little bit bigger than what we're seeing in other locations. So again, this is just 1 year's worth of data, kind of a snapshot. So we don't want to assume that, this is the norm across the board, but just what we saw in spring of 2024. Looking at biomass, we saw, our biggest catch of alewife were found in the South Main Lake, followed by the North Main Lake part. And then rainbow smelt, definitely smaller, but still some peaks there in Mallett's Bay.
Could you go back one?
One more slide, or?
No, yeah, go forward. Okay. So what were the conclusions on this one?
Oh, just that we had our highest weight in catch for alewife was in the South Main Lake region. So yeah, these, I know the colors are a little bit difficult to see, but it's North Central, South Main Lake, and then Inland Sea and Mallett's Bay. And then slimy sculpin, pretty low across the board. And then trout perch, we saw an increased catch in the North Main Lake. So next steps, the Fisheries Technical Committee will review the forage fish survey options available to them. Important indicators will be discussed. And so essentially how forage fish data can be used to guide salmonid stocking decisions. And then the FTC's recommendation will be reviewed by the management committee. And then eventually forage fish will be sampled again. And with that, I will take any questions.
Shall we have time for a few questions?
Yes.
Is there more than one species of smelt in Lake Champlain?
No, there's not. There's just rainbow smelt.
They're just rainbow smelt.
Yes. Yes.
Where can you access all this information? Is it on the UVM's website or?
So this is preliminary data so far. I will be graduating this coming summer, so hopefully this data will be published eventually. The original Vermont forage fish trawling data and hydroacoustics and gill netting data is available on their website. It is published data.
Next up, before our quick break, is Dave Minkoff with the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay. Hi, folks. Good to see everybody. Thanks for coming out on a weekend. Appreciate seeing everybody and, all my collaborators here. Real quick, so I'm Dave Minkoff. I'm out of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Lake Champlain office. I do habitat work, specifically stream connectivity, fish passage work, both on the New York and Vermont sides of the lake. None of this work gets done without really strong partnerships. I mean, I can't overstate the importance of these partnerships. They're the folks that make these projects happen. I could stand here all day and just talk about that. I don't have time. So I'm here today to talk to you, although we do, quite a few of these connectivity projects every year. I'm here to talk to you about a set of projects that we did back in summer 2023 that connects with a lot of what you've been hearing today, which were dam removals on the Saranac River. So a little bit of background on salmon in the Saranac. You've heard some of this stuff before. Specific to the Saranac, this was DeWitt Clinton, who was a naturalist and former governor of New York State. He talked about how there were once so many salmon in the Saranac that laborers would come and work there, and they'd stipulate, you can't feed a salmon every single meal. There were so many salmon that horses would try to ford the river and get startled, and it became like really hazardous for them. And he goes on to talk about how a mill dam was built on the lower part of the Saranac. This would have been right around the time of the Revolutionary War, just after. And the salmon tried for a number of years to come there and get over the dam, and failing that, they just abandoned the ground, is what he says. And this was a really big deal, even at the time. A big enough deal that the folks who live upstream on the Saranac actually brought a case to the New York State Supreme Court because there were no more salmon coming up. They were used to them. They relied on those salmon. That lawsuit was filed against Zephaniah Platt, one of the founders of Plattsburgh, the person who built that dam. Zephaniah Platt ended up winning that case because I guess it was deemed he owned so much of the land upstream that he was more affected than any of the other landowners around there. The story continues from there. Not only were salmon completely wiped out in the Saranac, but from the entire lake by the mid-1800s. We've heard some of this. In the 1970s, there were restoration efforts that began. And if we look at a map here, it's a little washed out, sorry, but a map of the lower Saranac, you see that the story of the Saranac today, I mean, there's Plattsburgh, it's still a story of dams, right? So as of a couple of years ago, just in the lower 6 miles of the Saranac River, you still had 4 dams there. So we're going to look first at the Imperial Mills Dam. That's the lowermost dam in the Saranac. This is what it looks like today. Built in the mid-1800s. It's still there. Salmon swim up to the base of this dam every year. I mean, there's fishermen here. I'm sure most of you already know about this. It's a popular fishing spot every fall. And Kurt talked a little about the size of the salmon runs are quite significant. But the fish bump up against the dam and they can't go any farther. So an important part of the story that I'm telling you now is that in the last number of years, New York State DEC decided to build a fishway at the Imperial Mills Dam. There's a lot more to that story, and I'm expecting some questions about that, which is great. But let's just focus on the fact that the fishway was going to go in. But based on that, if we look again at the map, you can see, well, if salmon can get by there, migrating salmon, we still have a dam here, here, and here. So, you know, what's going to happen then? So to tell this part of the story, I'm actually going to jump upstream here to Treadwell Mills, about 6 miles upstream from the mouth of the river. Treadwell Mills is an active hydro project. It's owned by Patriot Hydro, or Lower Saranac Hydro Project, I think it's also called, besides Treadwell Mills. There's a fishway, as you can see. That's here. That was built in the 1980s, I believe. It's never been tested. It's never had fish in it because migratory fish can't get up there yet, right? So we don't know how well it works, how efficient it is, but we do know that there is a fishway and that at least hypothetically, fish should be able to get up and over this dam. I'll mention that the owners of this dam are currently under review for their Federal Energy Regulatory Commission license, and some of the stipulations involve making sure that this is fish passable, that it's efficient, and that it's working well. So there's studies underway to ensure that that'll be the case. And if not, there'll have to be some remediation there. Going back to our map, we still have these 2 dam remains here, Friedenberg Falls and Indian Rapids. So let's look first at Friedenberg Falls. This was a pulp mill that was built in the 1890s. That's what it used to look like. As of a couple of years ago, this is what it looked like right around there. You can see there's not really a dam left there, but there's a whole lot of debris I wonder if yeah, there we go. So big chunks of steel that drifted as far downstream as I-87. I mean, this is, you know, a few hundred yards. Big hunks of steel in the river. And maybe most importantly, if you look at an aerial view, right over here, this is where the dam used to be. And up here, you can see a lot of timber cribbing still on the river. Those are big, giant timbers that are actually pinned to the riverbed. This was altering the river flow, interfering with natural stream function, potentially interfering with fish passage as well. And if we look downstream from there at Indian Rapids, what we had a couple of years ago, there was a dam built there in 1904. This was built actually as a hydro dam to power the Lozier Car Company. So there was an automobile manufacturing company in Plattsburgh a while back. And if you look at it, you can see that over here, there was a spillway, sort of a cement promontory. This was the powerhouse. Underneath that, you had these arches, and the water would flow through the powerhouse, generate electricity, and flow out through these arches into this tail race here, which was separated from the rest of the river by this wall. And as of a couple of years ago, you can see this was the spillway. The middle part was breached. Over here, you have that cement promontory. This was the base of the powerhouse, which would have sat up here. Over here, you have those arches, and this is the wall that separates the tail race from the rest of the river. But a significant amount of cement in here. And you can see there is a big drop, even in this breach that was intentionally created in the 1950s. And it was a real barrier to fish passage, not only because of the drop, but you can see during high water, this is, you know, fish aren't getting up and over there. And yeah, so I'll try and be quick here. So going back to this, considering the fishway that was going to go in at Imperial Mills, and that we had a fishway here, we worked proactively with the dam owners. Trout Unlimited was really critical to this. They were the project managers, really important partners. And we worked to get rid of these two dams in the middle so that when we have fish passage over here at Imperial Mills, when DEC is finished with that project, salmon should be able to get all the way up the river. So first, Friedenberg Falls, here you can see some of the construction, a before and after photo. All that timber cribbing is gone. Natural stream function is restored. Big pieces of cement and stuff pulled out. Indian Rapids Dam, this was a significant construction project. It was huge, rather complicated, but we were real happy with the results. Removed the spillway, removed the powerhouse, and you can see the rapids, the actual rapids at Indian Rapids were in fact restored, and really it's fish passable at this point. So the next step will be the fishway at Imperial Mills. That is currently, I believe that the designs are finished, and I believe there was one round of bidding. I think it's out for rebidding. Assuming that bids come in, that fishway should be completed by around 2027. And at that point, we should have fish passage up the Saranac River for landlocked Atlantic salmon to the entirety of their historic range for the first time since the Revolutionary War. So really exciting times. And I'm running out of time, so I'm happy to take any questions. And there will be time for more of these questions later on too.
We have time for some questions.
How effective are fishways?
Great question. It's a great question. They're not as good as removing a dam. The ideal scenario is to not have any obstruction in the river, for sure. And the difference can be significant. There are review papers that give various numbers. It depends a lot on the species, the target species. Salmon, Atlantic salmon, tend to do better than a lot of other species on fishways. there's a review paper that came out maybe 3 or 4 years ago now that indicated the most modern structures at their most efficient should be able to pass about 80% of the fish. That's the target goal for the one on the Saranac. My understanding is that that rarely happens right away, even if that goal is achieved, that there's usually some tweaks that have to be made and changes, and it sort of tends to be a work in progress. Yeah, and you know, one of the complications is when you have multiple fishways, then you get sort of a compounding effect of, you know, restricted passage. Yeah.
I have a follow-up to that. I've looked at the literature of years, so the 80% figure you just quoted was adults moving upstream. How about fry
Right.
and smolts moving downstream? What's it?
Yeah, I don't know the numbers on that actually. I don't know if Kurt, if you, or Lori maybe.
It all depends on the specific dam. I mean, it can be anywhere from above 90% survival in a dam to like lower than 30. I mean, it all depends on how well that particular fishway is working. A lot of it depends on migration timing, so yeah, how the dam height, the turbines. So the answer is it depends. It's highly variable. But like Dave said, it's always worse than if there wasn't a dam there to start with. Thank you.
And I do know that as part of the FERC relicensing at Treadwell Mills, where there was a fishway, downstream passage is one of the things they're looking at, as well as upstream passage.
Thank you.
So, yeah. Do we have time for it?
Yep.
Oh, man, I tried to rattle through that quick. Maybe I went too quick. Luke, yeah.
I heard that there wasn't a whole lot of bid on the fish ladder. Can you comment on that?
I'm going to defer over here to my colleagues at the state.
No, so went out to bid, we had no bids, we extended the bids, went back out for bidding. We had a bid come in, one single bid. It was significantly more than what we estimated. We're retooling the bid right now and going back out soon. So
Our engineers are working, there was multiple companies. I'm not probably going to use the right language, multiple companies that ordered the bid package review materials, but only one that ended up putting in a bid. So our engineers are working with those other companies to determine why they didn't put one in.
they're trying to remove some of the uncertainty in the package because we're seeing this all over the place with big contracts, multi-million-dollar contracts. There's so much uncertainty right now in the prices of materials and stuff that people are shy on bidding. Okay, and that's why the bid we got was so very high. So we're trying to retool the package before we get it out.
Well, there is another option. We can bid on a different type of project. Yes.
I mean, again, I'd have to defer to the state on that. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has no jurisdiction there. I would say in general, anybody who does this kind of work would prefer to have no barrier at all in a river. And there is a reduction in, you know, the number of fish that can migrate when you have a fishway as opposed to a free river. That said, a fishway will pass more fish than a dam with no fishway, which will pass no fish. So, you know, these things can get complicated, as you know too. I know, and so, you know, it's always trying to come up with the best solution given whatever the realities of a given situation might be.
So for any of those that don't know me, I'm Steve Smith. I'm the new Sea Lamprey Control Program Manager. Many of you knew
Brad Young, he was at these meetings most years giving an update on sea lamprey control. Brad's moved on to a new position out in Green Bay. So I'm now overseeing the lamprey program. I'm not new to the program. I've been a biologist working on sea lamprey control for about 18 years. The last 15 or so, I've been coordinating all the treatments, lampricide treatments around the lake. So quickly, the service, Fish and Wildlife Service, is sort of taking the lead of the lamprey program, but I want to just make sure everybody understands it's certainly a cooperative effort. The states are engaged with us, helping wherever we need them, most particularly when we're doing lampricide treatments. And the program is supported by the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, which is critical. Many of you have probably seen this figure before. Brad usually shares this. The scope of the program currently around Lake Champlain, there's about 20 tributaries that could be scheduled for a lampricide application on a regular 4-year cycle. Some of these require treatment less frequently. There are 6 lentic areas that is basically delta habitats that are or can be occupied by larval sea lamprey that we would treat with granular balicide. Again, some of these are regular, some only when needed. Currently, we have about 7 small tributaries that we're actually trying to control lamprey populations with blocking or trapping. Those are Morpion Stream in Quebec, Mallett's Creek, Pond Brook, Sunderland Brook, Trout Brook, also Mullen Brook and Beaver Brook over in New York. We're trapping on additional 3 or 4 streams every year to try to inform an adult assessment index that we're working on putting together. That would be, the the Great Shazy River, there's a trap, but we're still controlling that through lampricide. We're trying some trapping on the Winooski River. This is to estimate adult abundance. And we have recently constructed or improved barriers on the Great Shazy or the La Platte River to minimize the length of lampricide treatments that are required. So jumping right into an update over the last year. So for 2024, we had surveyed other typical lamprey producing tributaries in the northeast region of the lake. So that's in the Vermont and the north side. And there were no lamprey found, or very few lamprey found in the Lamoille River, Stonebridge Brook, and the La Platte River. So those streams were taken off our treatment list. What we did treat in 2024 was the Winooski River and the Missisquoi River. So first on the Winooski, we finally were able to do a lampricide treatment here on November 5th. There were some delays through October due to low water conditions. We had some scheduling issues. We finally had conditions in the river in November. We had to work around a construction project that was ongoing at Winooski 1 by that time of year. So there's a crane. You can see the crane in the picture. That's not to do with us. Our crew is set up on the top of the dam, making the application to the upstream side of Winooski 1. Our gear and equipment set up there. The construction just kind of really made it a little bit of a pain because we usually could access and drive through this area. We were kind of pinned up on the top, but we made it work. Our data indicate this was a successful treatment based on what we collected during the treatment concentration wise. We're going to do a survey there in 2025. larval survey will tell us how effective we actually were. Following that Winooski River treatment, we were able to get to the Missisquoi. Again, low water through most of the early fall. Had us push back. Conditions were not favorable for treatment by early part of November, we were able to get to the Missisquoi. Here, you know, we have all that other equipment you saw in the other picture, plus we have to deploy a 400-foot spreader hose because there's no hydro power on the Missisquoi River. So this is a 2-inch flexible hose that gets deployed just above Swan Dam. There's spray nozzles across this hose every 4 or 5 feet. It allows us to apply the lampricide evenly, quickly, getting it spread throughout the water column. Here again, everything following the treatment looks good on paper. The survey this summer will tell us exactly how effective we were at removing the larvae. Quickly, we had intended to treat the Boquette River again over in New York. I think some of you may have heard Brad talk about this last year. We had identified larvae upstream of the Willsboro Dam, which got removed back in 2014 or 15. We intend to go over and treat the Boquette River this spring in May to get that treatment wrapped up that was planned for 2024. Moving on to how things are looking lamprey-wise out in the lake, right? The results of the control effort. Right now, still wounding rates on lake trout and salmon are the metrics that we're using to define program effectiveness. These are defined length classes on both fish. And we're summing all fresh and healing wounds. So anything probably that happened in the last 8 months. We're tracking this on both species. You can see here, you know, we have seen a major reduction since the early 2000s across the board. 2022, we achieved our wounding rate goals for both species. Salmon has remained below our target. Lake trout just above for the past 4 years. This is just a different look at the same data. So I included here our lampricide treatment effort. So the bars that show up every year is the stream miles that are treated with TFM and a standardized amount of effort that we're putting out on the deltas. This is granular balicide. So you can see through the years, somewhere around like 2014 is when we shifted our treatment cycle to the regional alignment. So we have treatment in 3 zones of the lake. And then we have a 4th year where we're not doing any treatments. You can see that in 2017, 2021. That would be the same again in 2025. And the triangles and boxes are the lake trout and salmon. And you can see some years we have a situation where from 2017 to 2018, right, we see lake trout wounding drop by about 16 wounds per 100. We have salmon wounding jump by about 12 wounds per 100. Are there really fewer or more lamprey out there, or sort of what's going on? The same thing happens here, 20, 21, 22. If we look at those wounding rates combined, right, if we add salmon and lake trout together to get an idea for what the wounding feels like over time, you can see that here. A reduction from 2003, obviously, down to the present, where we're kind of hovering just over our target. Quickly, just to highlight, you know, some of you may be familiar with the Great Lakes. Their wounding targets are very much lower than ours. Why are we seeing that kind of discrepancy? One reason is, you know, we're dealing with a completely different beast, right? We know that. That's not a surprise. Lake Superior is monstrous. But if you looked at the amount of habitat for lake trout in the Great Lakes compared to how much treatment effort they are required to put out, and you compare that to what we're doing, you can see that in Lake Champlain, we have about 7.2 kilometers of stream that needs treatment for every kilometer square or cubic kilometer of lake trout habitat. Okay. In the Great Lakes, that number is well under 1 in every case. So we're looking at greater than 20 times the amount of lamprey production per lake habitat that we have here compared to what they're seeing in the Great Lakes. So we may never realistically be able to set our targets at 10 wounds per 100 for lake trout. Just may be impossible because of the production potential we have compared to what they see out there. But with that said, right, with the reduction that we've seen in wounding over the last 10 years, we know what's happening with lake trout. Okay, we've got natural reproduction. We're looking at hopefully a self-sustained lake trout fishery, right, population and fishery. So it may be that, you know, this wounding target actually makes sense. And with the amount of effort we're putting forward, we'll be able to sort of keep that going, right? So supporting a self-sustained fishable population of lake trout. And that's all the info I have. I can answer questions if anybody has them. Okay. Mark, go ahead.
Just a thought. Given that you've got these wild lake trout coming into the system now, can you differentiate, or will you be able to differentiate wounding rates for stock versus wild
Sure.
trout? Or for that matter, salmon, you've got different strains of salmon.
Yeah, well, I mean, the we can differentiate in so much as we can identify them, right? So the lake trout, it's easy. Right now, if they have a clip, we know they came out of the hatchery. If they don't, we know they're wild, right? So that's an easy one. The salmon, it's a little more difficult. It would take a much deeper dive with some of the VT, the genetic tagging.
Have you done that, or will you?
Yeah, we have. We've looked at it for sure, and it does most of the time indicate that these wild fish are the wounding rate's even lower.
Okay.
So they may be better at avoiding sea lamprey.
More fit.
Yeah.
Say thanks to salmon we're getting in the Saranac River. Majority of these are clean. Their balloon is all healed over, but I mean, most of them are just bars of silver. They're just beautiful. Nice, healthy fish, stocky. It's good to see. They were always that way, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. It's good to hear. Steve.
Yeah, I just want to let everybody in this room know how crucial this program is to the management of this lake. All this other research you heard today, the whole foundation of that is built upon this lamprey program. It's very important that this program keep going, and Steve and his crew does a tremendous job, and I don't think it can be overstated. That's all.
Thank you, people.
All right, next we have Nicole Balk with the New York State DEC.
All right, can you guys hear me, or should I get the mic closer?
That mic doesn't help though.
It doesn't. Okay. All right, I'll try to be loud. All right, so I'm Nicole. I'm with New York State DEC. Over the past 4 years, we've conducted ice fishing and open water surveys on Lake Champlain, and we've gone out and talked to anglers and asked them about their fishing to see what's going on in the lake, try to get a pulse of the fishery. Thank you. So the value of doing an angler survey or a creel survey is in documenting significant changes to species composition, fisheries management practices, any environmental disturbances in the lake, including aquatic invasive species, increased sediment or phosphorus inputs to the lake, and climate change. So the information that we gather from the anglers includes preferred target species, catch and harvest rates, angler opinions, and then all of this information is going to be put together eventually to create, we're working on right now, developing a fisheries management plan for Lake Champlain. Okay. So the plan is to target 4 bays each year during the ice fishing season. The first 2 years of the survey, we were able to do that. There was solid ice on all 4 bays, the whole length of the lake. Last year, only Kings Bay up in the northern part of the lake was fishable. So that wasn't a real solid survey. But that kind of emphasizes why we do multiple years of creel surveys. Some people ask, well, why do you keep doing it? Well, sometimes we get a year like that where it's like, well, what are you going to know about the lake based on one bay? So we do multiple years to figure out if there's any trends and see if there's any significant changes. Let's see. And then last year we had Kings Bay and Deep Bay. So Kings Bay and then Deep Bay, I think I can't see it on the map, but it's just a little bit lower. But both on the north end of the lake, we had no ice down here that was safe for people to go out and fish for any length of time. There would have been one day where there was actually ice and we saw an angler out there. But what can you say about an entire bay with one angler? So that was a little disappointing. But the first 2 years were really solid. We're going to probably base most of our information on that. So last year, we found a yellow perch. 88% of the anglers were fishing for yellow perch, and the other 12% were fishing for northern pike. This is a very specific fishery, perch, pike. That's pretty much it. And this is a trend over all 4 years. That's not anything. There's nothing different from 2021 to 2024. You can see in 2021 there was a huge number of fish caught, but again, that was 4 bays worth of fish. This is just 2 bays. So there's going to be some variability there. Did I write? Oh, I reversed the number of bays. Sorry. Oops. Okay. We asked anglers to rate their fishing on the day of the interview to try to get a feel for what you think about the fishery, how it's going. There are 153 interviews in 2024. 38% of the anglers said they were satisfied with their fishing, and then 35% said they were not. So not sure what to take away from that. But there's probably room for improvement. Next, we asked people what kind of gear they were using. Tip-ups seem to be going out of style, which I thought was interesting. Most anglers are now using jigging rods to catch their perch. We asked anglers if they were happy with the size of fish they caught, and 63% of them said yes, so that was encouraging. So we did the ice creel for like 4 years, and we're going to do it again in 2028, and then on a 5-year basis, just to keep tabs on the ice fisher and make sure nothing crazy is happening out there. Let's see. There it is. That's what I started talking about. So my notes aren't like lined up properly somehow. Anyway, so we got some reports from anglers that the fish size of the perch they're catching are smaller this year and last year. And just too many dinks, what's going on? So we measured quite a few fish. And you can see in 2023, these black bars, they are definitely shifted more towards the lower end of the spectrum. A lot of them are in the 7-inch range, which isn't huge for perch. So now we've got a little bit of data to kind of support what you guys are telling us. So we can go out and maybe do a population survey and try to figure out if there's really anything wrong or if this was just specific to, those 2 bays that we were looking at. Okay, so we estimated catch and harvest and angler effort. We got about 510 angler days of effort during the ice fishing season last year. Catch rates for perch were really quite good, 7.7 fish in an hour. While northern pike catch rates were very low, unfortunately. These are both very harvest-oriented fisheries, as you can tell. We're keeping most of the fish, even with a low catch rate. Whatever you get, you're keeping. So you'll see it's quite different than the open water fishery. I'll talk about that in just a few minutes. We did find jigging rods yielded a higher catch rate for perch than tip-ups on both of the bays, Kings Bay and Deep Bay. Hot tip. All right. Yep. And we asked anglers for their comments and concerns about the fishery. We do this every year. We want to hear from you, get your feedback. Sometimes you bring up stuff that we wouldn't think would be a problem, so we can go investigate that. So a lot of people said the fish are small, mostly talking about the yellow perch. But there's always a few people that say, oh no, the fish are a good size. They're doing great this year. So we're going to try to keep that in balance. But again, if we talk to 100 anglers and most of them are saying fish are small, that gives us an idea of what something might be going on. Still concerns about overharvest of yellow perch. We hear you. Sea lamprey, a few anglers reported they saw sea lamprey circling their ice fishing holes, which was pretty unique. we asked other people on other lakes if they've ever heard of that, and no one has ever, heard of this behavior. So that was kind of cool. I'm glad people reported that to our Creel clerk. Unfortunately, no one took a picture or a video because that would have been really neat. But anyways, if you see something like that, something weird or whatever, let us know. You can always call, email. Let's see. And then we always get requests for stocking. This year it was requests for more walleye. And then there's a couple people who said, oh no, walleye are plentiful. So what does that mean? All right, now we're going to switch gears. I'm going to talk about the open water fishing survey. All right, so we conduct this survey from May through September at 9 access points in New York. We started out with 12 and kind of whittled them down based on angler use, how many people were there, and if we're getting any good data. We got a pretty good set of 9 solid sites ranging from Rouse's Point up in the north all the way down to South Bay, the southern part of the lake. Again, just on the New York side, but we are working with Vermont. We're making plans to do a whole lake open water roving surveys. We'd go on boats and talk to anglers, but New York and Vermont to cover more of the lake and get a better picture of what's going on out there. But yeah, can't go on forever on that, but we're working on something. All right, so the most popular species, as you probably guessed, is black bass. 49% of the anglers are targeting them. That's the same every year we've done it, so pretty consistent. We had 360 completed trip interviews, so thank you to anyone who was over on our side and did one of these surveys. Very helpful. We also got the catch cards that were handed out for people who were heading out in the lake. We give them a card, say, what'd you catch? Put it in the drop box. 33% of those were returned, which is a really good catch rate or return rate, I think, for those. So thank you to anyone who did that. And a special thank you for those who actually put a stamp on it and mailed it to me. That was much appreciated. And for reference, that usually completes or adds about 100 surveys worth of information, people sending those in. So it's a big deal and we appreciate it. Let's see, the most interviews we got were at Point Au Roche boat launch. And then we found this year nearly equal effort in each of the lake zones, the northern, central, and southern part of the lakes. We found in the North Lake, most people are targeting black bass. Central Lake, lake trout, and Atlantic salmon, but also some black bass. And the southern lake was black bass, but a lot of people target anything. So can't really put a specific species there. Okay, so what did we catch? These anglers, about 250 anglers, caught 8,718 fish, harvested 2,306 of them. Catch rate's pretty good overall, 2.26 fish per hour. The highest catch rate in the northern and central zone was for yellow perch. Clearly a lot of perch out there, but apparently many of them are dinks. We'll figure that out. The highest catch rate in the southern zone was for anything, because a lot of people just fish for anything. They didn't seem to care, and they were successful. So good for them. All right. So we also asked these anglers to rate their fishing on the day of the interview. More anglers were satisfied than dissatisfied, so 36% satisfied, 28% dissatisfied, and these numbers are the same for the last 4 years. All right, looking at effort in the northern zone. So most of the anglers target black bass, anything, and yellow perch. Getting into the nitty gritty, the catch rates. So the species with the highest catch rate was yellow perch, which is kind of ironic given the relatively low effort compared to black bass, which had a much lower catch rate. The targeted catch rate for perch seems to be declining the last few years, which kind of falls in line with what you guys have been telling us. Catch rates for bass are highly variable from year to year, so we had 0.55 last year and 1.13 fish per hour back in 2021. It just seems to be natural variability. Northern pike catch rates actually increased this year, but they're also kind of variable. Let's see, lake trout catch rates increased this year, so I think that's a good sign. We've got more wild reproduction and better catch rates. Unfortunately, Atlantic salmon catch rates are still low. They weren't even targeted by the anglers we were interviewing in the last 3 years, so I don't have any data for that, or the catch rate was less than 0.01 fish per hour. So, not great, but again, we've got a lot of studies and research going on trying to figure out where that bottleneck is, why we're stocking them, and then you guys are not catching it. So, We started a river creel survey last year, again, to target like salmon anglers, because in the open water survey, we're at boat ramps along the lake, hanging out, waiting for people to come back. But it seems a lot of the Atlantic salmon anglers aren't using those boat ramps. So we're not getting those anglers. So we're making efforts to get better data. All right, moving to the central area lake, the main lake area. Most of the anglers were targeting black bass, lake trout, and Atlantic salmon. I want to note the yellow perch catch rate. It seems absurdly high. It is absurdly high. It's inflated. There was a couple of anglers who reported they caught 200 or 300 perch in 5 hours. So it's not a super realistic value. In general, there aren't that many people targeting perch during the open water season. It's primarily an ice fishing species, but that's why that looks a little weird. The bass catch rate seems to be declining. I found that a little bit concerning. Lake trout catch rates are also declining. However, it almost seems that if there's a high catch rate in the central part of the lake, it's lower in the northern part of the lake and vice versa. So I'm not sure if they're just shifting the zones each year. I don't have hard data on that, but that just seems to be what it looks like. Okay. Let's see. So Atlantic salmon catch rates seem to be stable. They're low. But like I said, we're trying to figure out what the issue is there. Does the mouse work? Oh no, it's not. No, it doesn't. Okay. Cool. All right, so the southern zone, most of the anglers down there were targeting black bass, and again, anything. 2 months. All right, we saw black bass catch rates are highly variable down there, but declined a little bit last 2 years. Not really sure why. We did hear reports from tournament anglers as well as the local anglers fishing in the southern areas that the bass weren't there. So this supports that. Catch rates for pike were good, but not in previous years. I'm not sure if something's changed down there with the habitat. And let's see, I had one of the targets was channel catfish, but there weren't enough caught to actually calculate the catch rate. It was less than 0.01 fish per hour. So there's a few people targeting them, but they're not a mainstream species yet. And I just wanted to note, yellow perch were not targeted by any of the anglers in 2024. So even though we had a catch rate, actually, so that was the other zone. So the high catch rate was the central zone. Anyways. Okay, so we also asked anglers if they're happy with the size of the fish caught. 70% of them said yes. That was a little bit higher. Last year was 60%, so that's a good sign. We asked them if they use live bait, mostly to get at whether anglers are a vector for introducing invasive species. 93% of you don't even use live bait, so it seems like that's a pretty low risk source for invasion. So keep doing what you're doing. Concerns, invasive species, obviously, we heard about the sea lamprey. Water fleas are still a problem. Goby are potentially coming through the canals. We always get requests for stocking, walleye, salmon, brown trout, and muskie. Had some complaints about bass tournaments, mostly just about the number of tournaments and how they could be harming the bass fishery. So yeah, and then concerns about the number of prey fish. Again, we hear you. We've got a prey fish survey getting started. So. And then generally just low catches of perch, crappie, walleye, and pike. A couple requests for improvement at angler access. We can start working on that. And then if you ever want to find these reports, it's a little tricky. You can always just email me and I will send you the direct link or copy of those. There's a couple on the site now. I'm hoping to get a couple more on there in the next 2 months. We're currently processing them down in Albany. All right. Phew. Made it.
I'll give you a 2-minute warning.
Put my eyes on here. Thanks, Margaret. Good morning, everybody. This is the final leg of the Walleye Whirlwind Tour for the last 10 days. I started in New Orleans at the Aquaculture America conference presenting on this and have done another presentation in Grand Isle. I see at least one person, 2 people that were there. So sorry for the repeat. But what we're doing in Vermont for walleye larviculture is gaining a lot of attention not only in this country, but throughout North America and the world, in fact. And I'll hit that on the next slide. So we're a small program, but we're making a big impact. So we only got 15 minutes, so I just want to present an overview on the advancements that we've made, growing walleye fingerlings intensively, and our specific techniques are covered in this Springer publication. And that bulleted list that you see up there is not complete, but that's folks that we've talked to probably in the last 18 to 24 months about walleye larviculture. And our most recent visit was from the province of Saskatchewan. Their province is going to build a $4 or $5 million facility, so not as big as, let's say, Wyoming. I ran into people from Wyoming down in New Orleans. They are building a $30 to $40 million facility in Wyoming for warm water culture, but very specific in targeting walleyes using our techniques. So here's a quick history lesson on this slide. Lake Champlain walleye culture goes way back. Walleye culture began at the end of the 19th century with the culture operations going back and forth between the state of Vermont and the U.S. Fish Commission. And there were a lot of fish handled. And the program was focused primarily on fry stocking. And that fry stocking was done from Maine all the way down the coast, even into Pennsylvania. As you can see, there was a lot of fish handled, a lot of fry hatched and distributed throughout. Many of those stockings obviously did not take hold. So a little more history. Walleye population decline was the result of excessive commercial harvest and overfishing. A cooperative management effort was established to develop plans to bring back the fishery to Lake Champlain, which included extensive ponds that were operated by the Lake Champlain Walleye Association, as well as adding some extensive ponds to Bald Hill Fish Culture Station in the Northeast Kingdom. And for a large portion of the program from when it started until about 2011, that was where fish were moved from Lake Champlain to the Bald Hill Hatchery up in the Northeast Kingdom for this effort. So fast forward to 2011, Edweed Fish Culture Station was designated for Lake Champlain due to VHS being detected in the Great Lakes. And Lake Champlain is connected to the Great Lakes via the Richelieu River on the top there. And, obviously the St. Lawrence is the outlet of Lake Ontario. So we have some connectivity there. Our division decided to make Edweed Fish Culture Station a basin management facility dedicated to stocking Lake Champlain exclusively. And blasting bedrock on the island out in Grand Isle would be pretty costly to have to try to think that we could put ponds out there. Very expensive. So the option was decided to use recirculation technology, which we'll get into here as I move through. But that also was looked at as historically being recognized as a low percentage and as far as a survival for a culture method. I was asked if we could do this. I thought we could crack the nut in about 10 years. We did it a little sooner than that, but it was definitely a learning curve. So there's 3 rivers that we use to source broodstock rotationally: the Poultney River, Winooski, and Missisquoi River. And most recently, we added a 4th, the Lamoille River, in 2023. So when collections are done, we're collecting males and females for broodstock, and that's accomplished through electrofishing. Adults are transported to the isolation facility that we have outside our Edweed, and they're held separately. When biologists are there, and Shawn oversees the Poultney River, they're getting the fish running up into the mid to high 40s, but we wait to spawn the fish until we have everybody on station. So we drop that temperature under 40 degrees, so it kind of puts them on hold. Once we have everybody on station, then we bring the temperature up to 50, 52, and we have spawning happening within 24 hours. So I guess to just look through on the pictures right here, the upper left, we're disinfecting a fish with iodophor, and then a male being stripped here in the middle picture on the top, female stripped up above. And down below here, you can see our mud mixture that's mixed. Walleye eggs are very adhesive. So to de-adhese the eggs after fertilization, we use this mud slurry. That's not the only technique that can be used. Some programs use acetic acid. Folks over in Europe doing Xander use milk. So there's a bunch of different techniques to adhese the egg or de-adhese the eggs. Our choice is Fuller Earth clay. And I got a quick little video on that, so you can see that it keeps it from sticking together. And again, like I mentioned, some people use tannic acid. And from here, these eggs will get taken with the net over into a spot where they get rinsed and get the mud off of the eggs, and then into a disinfection vat. And this disinfection vat has 50 parts per million. You can see how the eggs are now not hanging together and split apart. And when we do this, it usually takes like we'll do 2 to 3 spawnings per disinfection before moving to start another vat for disinfection. And they're going to stay in the vat for 30 minutes for that disinfection. And when that's complete, we'll end up draining off the iodophor and putting the eggs into a cradle. The cradle will hold quite a few eggs. Well, we have 3 different cradles that we'll work into here. And the eggs have to water harden for about 4 to 6 hours. We're happy with the fish when they want to spawn or are ready for us in the morning. Sometimes it may be the afternoon, so you can add on that 4 to 6 hours. It has not been uncommon for us to be laying eggs to bed into incubation at 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes. So we usually lay down about 4 million eggs, and again, that's small compared to a lot of other programs, and we can get that done in about 12 to 15 jars. And incubation is at 50 to 52 degrees, and hatching begins in 18 days. To comparison, for salmonids at that same temperature, it would take about 50 days. So when the eggs start to hatch, we move them out onto the hatching troughs that are mounted over the top of the hatching tanks. And we'll put 2 jars per hatching trough. And then we have there in the hatching trough, as the eggs come out, and you'll see a video on this in a minute, we have baffles in these hatching troughs to settle out the eggshells so that the eggshells don't drop into the hatching trough. So here you can see walleye looking for the surface here. They end up dropping down through the funnel into the tank. They're about as big as a mosquito larva. And you can see the egg cells settling out with the baffle technique. And at the back end of the trough is a light at the discharge of the trough, and that drops down into the hatching tank. So here there's fry swarming around. They're 3 to 4 days old as they use their yolk sac. And when they're born, when they hatch, they have an epithelium across their lips to keep their mouth closed. And after 3 to 4 days at the temperature that we're hatching them off at about 60 degrees, then they will open their mouth. And herein lies the conundrum for us. That's a 5-day-old walleye. Check the teeth out. It's only 5 days old. So if you don't give them the right amount of food, you're going to get a lot of cannibalism. And again, this is the technique that we have developed to try to not have that happen. And we'll work our way through that here shortly. But obviously, if there's not a lot of food, it's a rough neighborhood to live in, for sure. So we stock our fry in the culture tanks at an initial 22 to 24 fry per liter. That's about 45,000 per tank. And we enumerate the fry using an electronic fry counter, which you can make out here with staff looking at. Ben's checking out the electronics, watching, seeing how many are being counted. and then the bucket ends up getting moved up to put fry into the culture tank, which you see on the left there. You can recognize that the water's green. We'll talk about that in a minute. So here's one of our one of the primary breakthroughs that we've had is using self-cleaning tanks, and we got those with the help of the Walleye Association when we first started to look at doing this type of program or this technique. We didn't have the money. Walleye Association bought 4 of the tanks for us, and you can look at the picture in the middle here. That schematic. It's a low gear motor on the top that spins a squeegee on the wall and a squeegee on the bottom, and it spins around. It takes it an hour to get around the tank, so you can hardly see it moving. And then there's a deposition trough that ends up being depositing the waste feed, the feces, and the mortalities. And we need to count the mortalities so that we're feeding the correct feed rate. And these 2 graphs that you see on the bottom here just represent the mortality trend curves. We're always going to get a spike there, over to the left, because that's where a feed size change happens. But you can see on the self-cleaning tanks, it gets really quiet after that. And that's what we wanted. It actually increased our survival by 20%. So here's a picture of a tank in operation before we're putting fry and green water in. We have the spray bar on the surface to be able to break the surface tension, because the walleye need to fill their air bladder. And that's really an important process for them from a developmental standpoint. So here's the flows that we use through the culture run and the temperatures. As I said, those fish are mosquito larvae. We get them from mosquito larvae to 2 inches in 33 days. And so yeah, and the spray bar puts in like about another gallon a minute per tank. So we developed this green water technique that I had used working with Atlantic cod in Maine back in the day. It's a saltwater algae that holds its cellular shape very well in fresh water. And we add it 3 times a day for the first 14 days. And at 14 days, the walleye become photonegative and they start to migrate away from the light. And then we stop using the green water. So in the early years, we used shop lights over the top of the tanks. And back in the day, we're just copying what everybody else was doing. We had belt feeders. We had shop lights over the tanks. And then in 2015, we started going with a lot lower light. And just tooling around in here, you can see how dark it is. Those lights that are over the top of the tank, they will end up emitting 25 lux at the light and 16 lux at the surface. It's pretty darn dark in there. And we also have red running lights on the floor so we can see what we're doing when we're moving around. I only got 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna have to fly here, folks. Or maybe you can ask me questions later and I can borrow a few from there. But we have we use 2 different types of feed, one from Japan, one from France. This is, again, I could get into it later if you want to ask me. It's a technique that we blend these 2 diets together to get the benefits of both worlds. And I really don't have time to talk about it. So here's what we're looking at for where we were in the beginning for the first 6 years. Lots of cannibalism. You can see the bottom of the tank when we make harvests. Our survival rates and our lengths are not up to snuff. And you can look in the later years, we have very uniform size. We go to harvest the tank, you can't see the bottom of the tank. We're harvesting from a 5-foot circular, what most walleye programs harvest out of a half-acre pond. So we had bacteria gill disease in 2022, so we're not a winner all the time. But over the next 2 years, we got right back on track and nice uniform size fish to put out. Again, I'm going to have to fly here, so I don't have too much time. Shawn, I was going to ask you to talk, but we can do that later. But these are the marks that we use for the analysis. There's the difference between a 50 days post-hatch pond fish and a 50-day post-hatch fingerling from our systems. And again, we don't have time. When I'm done, this QR code will also be there, but Shawn has done a really good 5-minute video on this program. This is a YouTube video. If you ever want to hit that with your phone to get that QR code, please do. Again, very quickly here, the analysis. We're in the rivers every 3 years. So you can see, and the dorsal spine looks here. And this is another thing I was going to have Bernie talk about if I didn't waste my time here. Over 500 fish sampled. And you can see the bumps at all the 3-year intervals on the dorsal spine aging, and then very little, and some years none, on the years that we're not stocking fish on the Winooski, and that makes it a really recognizable that we're really not supplementing this fishery; we're maintaining this fishery. And when we're looking at 3-year-old otolith marks that I went through very quickly there, when Shawn's looking at that, 5 of the last 6 sample years on the Winooski were represented by 100% fish from culture. The 3 rivers that we work on, again, just trying to recognize that there's a lot of really good contribution from fish culture to these rivers, and we don't have data on the Lamoille because we just started it in 2023. And this is pretty much my last slide, but we've been working with getting the word out to colleagues about our program accomplishment, impact on the walleye fishery in Lake Champlain. The support of the Lake Champlain Walleye Association has been instrumental in the success that's achieved. The performance of intensively reared fingerlings is a testament to RAS technology and the ability to control the environment and biological parameters to obtain consistent production that has a positive effect on sport fish restoration and angling opportunities. Had to hustle through it, but hope that was cool.
As for questions?
Yes.
One time, Lake Champlain had a strong walleye fish rate. I've spoken to a number of anglers that claim that the reestablishment of the lake trout and the landlocked salmon fishery it caused a crash in the walleye. And I'm just wondering about the competition between all those species.
I probably would defer to Shawn on that one, but I would say that in talking to people who also fish walleyes, they would be not reluctant anymore to realize that they used to keep a hell of a lot of fish that drove down the population significantly. But as far as that impact, I would pass that on to somebody like Shawn.
That's a lot more than what we have time for right now, but I don't think we have any evidence that would suggest that walleye, have declined or did decline as salmonids came up. I mean, we had a long history of walleye populations that were strong and great fishing during, times that salmonids were also doing good. Right now, we got an unbelievable fishery right now, and we're seeing the salmonids going up, and we're seeing natural reproduction in lake trout. So, I don't think there's anything to that, but we could talk one later. Thank you.
All right, our next speaker is Meg Modley with the Lake Champlain Basin Program.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. I guess we'll wrap up the talk today talking a little bit about some of the threats that we have and some of the best management practices that can be taken to help protect Lake Champlain. So I was asked to come and talk about a few of those. I do want to just point out that we have a huge stack of the state of the lakes in the front of the room at the table that summarizes so much of the great work that the state agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and some of the researchers in the room are doing. So make sure to pick up one of those on your way out the door. And then there is a jar of some of the invasive round goby on the front table that we'll be talking about in the talk. So in Lake Champlain, we do track the number of non-native and invasive species that are present in the water. The last introduction that has an established population was in 2018. The fishhook water flea joined the spiny water flea that came in 2014. I do just want to point out that the number of species that we've been measured to cause some type of harm in the lake is about a dozen or so. Some of these non-native species are intentionally introduced for our enjoyment. So folks are familiar with some of the spiny and fishhook water flea impacts. In 2014, we saw a huge explosion of the spiny water flea. In 2018, when fishhook were discovered, they really dominated, and now most of what you're seeing out there are fishhook water flea and very few spiny water flea being caught on downriggers and fishing lines. And we are working hard to help anglers decontaminate their gear and equipment as they're exiting Lake Champlain to make sure that we're not moving some of those resting eggs or small fishhook spiny to other bodies of water. We have one new detection in Lake Champlain that occurred at the end of last year. Corbicula fluminea, otherwise known as golden clam or basket clam, was discovered at the South Lake boat launch on the New York side of Lake Champlain. Only a few dozen clams have been found so far, so we're not ready to call it an established population, but these are hermaphrodites. It only takes one. And we have 3 populations surrounding the southern end of Lake Champlain. They're present in the Champlain Canal. They're present in Lake George as of 2010 and in Lake Bomazene as of 2016. So all of those water bodies are draining directly into Lake Champlain, and unfortunately, it's probably only a matter of time until corbicula become established, starting in the south end of the lake. So we're going to keep an eye on that and give you more information as we know about it. We are tracking in the new State of the Lake report our management efforts to address water chestnut, predominantly in the southern end of Lake Champlain. It used to be a putting green, a huge navigation challenge, angling challenge, obviously not swimming or doing other recreation in the mats in the southern end of the lake. We bring in over $500,000 and add to that with state and local resources to support a mechanical harvesting on the southern end of Lake Champlain, as well as surveying and hand harvesting. So partners from New York, Vermont, Quebec, and our federal partners are working together to manage those sites. Unfortunately, we do have a few satellite infestations in the northern end of the lake. We are managing actively one in the Missisquoi National Wildlife Refuge, for example, and a new spot has developed at the Sandbar Wildlife Management Area that we're concerned about. We also track the number of known non-native and invasive species and water bodies that surround Lake Champlain, and we are connected to those water bodies by canalways, which is a pathway of concern, as well as overland transport on boats and trailers. The number of known non-native and invasives in the Great Lakes, you can see, is close to 190, close to 90 in the St. Lawrence, and over 122 in the Hudson River. So those are not unique or different from the ones that are present in Lake Champlain, but we really would like to prevent some of those established in those surrounding water bodies from making their way to Lake Champlain. So one of the biggest watch species or early detection species we're concerned about is the round goby. Again, that was detected at the confluence of the Mohawk and the Hudson rivers in 2021. It moved rather rapidly across the Erie Canal from the Great Lakes to that confluence and really raised or rang the alarm bells of a lot of our fisheries biologists and others concerned in the angling community about possible impacts of round goby both to the Hudson system as well as the threat to Lake Champlain. This really reinforced a long-term management goal that we have working to address the Champlain Canal as a possible pathway for invasive species movement between the Hudson and the Champlain drainages. And now that we have goby both on the northern doorstep to Lake Champlain and the southern doorstep to Lake Champlain, we're concerned about introduction through drifting and by swimming from this southern approach, as well as active movement, which could occur by aquatic hitchhikers moving in bait buckets or in live wells. So we have concerns because once they become established, it's very hard to get rid of them. They are going to compete directly with our other benthic native species in the lake. There have been impacts documented in other water bodies about decreasing The biodiversity, we are concerned because they're such aggressive egg eaters that they could have impacts to some of our species that we're trying to restore in the lake, like lake trout, for example. We're also concerned about bass nest security in terms of early fishing in the year, removing some of the males off the nests, and if goby were established, could possibly decimate those nests in the time that it takes to take the picture and return the bass to the water. They have been known to carry viral hemorrhagic septicemia, and we are tracking the populations both in the Richelieu River and the St. Lawrence Seaway, as well as the ones at the confluence of the Mohawk and the Hudson for that harmful invasive pathogen. So aside from that, anglers have said, and Shawn can probably share better than I, the impacts that anglers have shared have been about changing their experience fishing. In some of the water bodies where goby are established, all you're catching on the end of your line are goby instead of the target species that you're trying to bring in. So it is a little concerning, but I think very telling that one of the popular lures that's being sold looks exactly like a round goby. They are predated upon by a lot of our species, our sport fish in the lake. It can make them a little bit bigger in size, but it can also threaten the rest of the biodiversity and the food web within the system. We would prefer not to find out what the impacts might be to Lake Champlain. So what are we doing about it? Lake Champlain has a rapid response task force made up of many of the members of the experts in this room from New York, Vermont, and Quebec. We are partnering to respond with early detection monitoring. We're trying to pursue all avenues: education and outreach, spread prevention, research, and active management and early detection within the lakes and the Champlain Canal and the Richelieu River. So we're got the long-term vision of moving towards the Champlain Canal invasive species solution, some kind of a barrier. We're trying to evaluate interim solutions, so what can happen within the canals, and anybody who was in the Champlain Canal last season would know that they were double flushing and doing scheduled lockings at locks C1 through C4. And then there are rapid response plans that have been developed that say once a round goby may show up in some section of the Champlain Canal, New York State DEC and the Canal Corporation and other partners are working together to respond. So when we get a positive hit of either environmental DNA or a fish in hand from electrofishing or trawling, we have management actions that we know we can take next, which may include closing canal locks and as far and extreme as rote knowing sections of the canal system. But right now we're also looking at a possible interim measure of installing an electric barrier in the Champlain Canal system. So a lot of outreach. Some of the rapid response monitoring includes collection of environmental eDNA. New York DEC is doing a lot of electrofishing in the system itself. Focus between locks C1 and C4 in the lower end of the Champlain Canal. We are partnering and have found that we only have goby in hand right below lock C1. So they've swum upstream from the confluence of the Mohawk and the Hudson to right below lock C1. But we have two positive environmental eDNA detections above lock C2. In addition to that, our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service partners are collecting a lot of data throughout Lake Champlain using metabarcoding to look at species of conservation need, as well as some of the species that we're concerned about, like round goby and grass carp. So grass carp is another species we're really interested in keeping an eye on. There were two that were seen in the Richelieu River in the St. Ours Dam Fish Viewfinder, and one that was caught in 2022 in Kelly Bay. So we're doing early detection monitoring there and paying attention to where some of the sterile grass carp have been stocked in the state of New York to see if there might have been any escapes at outflows that may not have been 100% secure. So some more pictures of electrofishing. I just wanted to re-mention that we do have federal legislation in the Water Resources Development Act that names the Champlain Canal and the issue of invasive species, and that is a funding source to help us move forward through some of those challenges. So I'm going to skip through a few of the next slides and just get on to some of the education and outreach work that we're doing, as well as note that our partners in Quebec are really also doing similar work. They're doing a lot of environmental DNA collection in the Richelieu River, as well as looking through seining samples to collect goby. And unfortunately, in 2023, that was the first time they detected round goby above the St. Ours Dam. So fish in hand caught, and we have a few positive detections in the upper Richelieu River that we're concerned about and responding to in Lake Champlain. So our partnerships with Canada, Quebec Waterways, and the Quebec Ministry of Environment continue. We've toured the St. Ours Dam system and looked at the Champlain Canal, also to evaluate if there are invasive species spread prevention or mitigation measures that can be installed in those locations. So finally, we're just doing education and outreach with early detection, checking boats and trailers at launch sites, and really appreciate all the efforts that you're taking to inspect watercraft and fishing equipment. You are the eyes out there on the water, and when you see something, please continue to report that to the state agencies and the federal partners, because that really helps us. But we are present around Lake Champlain trying to do inspections and removing invasives where we can. And I think since we're pretty short on time, I will end with the number one note about round goby is luckily some of the state partners and federal partners are receiving reports of goby in Lake Champlain because they look so much like our native sculpin. And just the one thing, the way that you can tell them apart is by the fused disc on the belly or the pelvic fin is fused on the round goby, and it is splayed on the sculpin. So I will end with that. Thank you.
Questions for Meg?
It's actually a question for Shawn. As someone who often reposts your article from Bassmaster about Champlain not needing gobies, I'm curious if, from the time that article came out, if your opinion has grown stronger, if anything has changed.
I wrote that in August of last year.
Oh, it was last year.
So nothing has changed since then. I mean, it's still what I believe to be a massive crisis to Lake Champlain if they were to get in. You know, to the biodiversity of the lake, we have what we call benthic fish that live exclusively on the bottom of the lake that are both threatened and endangered in the lake that would be one of the first ones to be impacted. Not to mention things like, you know, log perch and other darters that are important food sources for many of our, you know, sport fish. You know, and all the impacts that Meg mentioned, you know, on possibility of impacting the emerging lake trout wild reproduction that we're seeing. Gobies are known to swarm lake trout spawning reefs, and they can get down into the crevices that the eggs, you know, fall into when they're deposited in the fall. You know, there could be impacts there, as well as swarming bass nests and things like that. So I think this is, you know, something that's really, really important for us to address as quickly as possible, and it could change the whole lake if they get in here.
Yeah, I guess just more of a comment, but it seems like this is like the existential threat to the lake, and I think we're pretty concerned. I'm heartened by the comments about the road known or the electrical barrier, but you know, I guess the question would be, what's it going to take to get our political leaders to elevate this to where it needs to be?
That's a big one, and it's a changing landscape. I think people need to just, what my goal is to help raise awareness and really inform the public and make sure that folks know what the threat is. And, you know, a lot of us are state employees and our federal employees, and we do not advocate for solutions, but we will put forward what we think are the best management solutions to protect the fishery. So it's going to take more, clearly. We have legislation, we have some funding sources, we're making progress, it's slow, and I wish it were faster.
Is there any commercial traffic through the canal, or is that exclusively recreational?
So there is some limited commercial use of the Champlain Canal. It's seen a significant decline over time. We're working with the Canal Corporation and New York State DEC to evaluate that. I would say the recent exception is the surge of the Champlain Hudson Power Express brought in a lot of that electrical line through the Champlain Canal. But as we understand it, there's one stone agate shipper that ships from just north of Lock C9 south and out, not coming into Lake Champlain, but north of that divide south. So that's what we're aware of. It's pretty limited. It's mostly recreational.
I'm just wondering if there's a way to possibly frame this as a social issue, right? Because you got a certain class of people that are able to afford these luxury yachts going through the canal. And then you've got the rest of us who script and save to maybe buy a motorboat or fish out of a canoe in Lake Champlain. Is that taking this away from biology, ecology, maybe framing in a social context could be the way that we would elevate that conversation?
Yeah, it's possible. I think there are other people, in the room also who've been involved in trying to mobilize stakeholder input to the process, and that's going to be needed. I think Vic was next, and then we can go around.
Can you give an update on the barrier study process?
Yeah, absolutely.
Where it is now, so.
Yeah, so the
I haven't heard much lately.
Fair. So the authorization is in the Water Resources Development Act. We haven't tapped that money, which is 100% federal, because we don't know what we want to do yet. So we're using another Army Corps of Engineers authorization. We've completed the phase 1 feasibility study for evaluating any kind of alternatives that could be implemented in the Champlain Canal. We are now moving on to phase 2, which is collecting actual hydrologic information around the Champlain Canal to give us information of how much water is contributed from the watershed, and we have to look at liens, and we have to look at property, and we have to look at sediments and toxicity. So we're going to gather all that information, do the NEPA process, and do some more boat design look to see what kind of boat lifts would be appropriate for installing if that was a selected alternative.
So that's still on the docket.
So the phase 2 barrier study, I think, should be days away from execution. And we have the local match secured by both the New York State DEC and from the Lake Champlain Basin Program and New England Interstate are contributing to the next phase of the project. Do you have anything to add, Steve?
It's on its way out the door.
Okay.
No, because I signed off on it.
Thank you, sir.
Right, we got one just before this gentleman right behind.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'll add, we can keep this, but we can also open it up to
everybody, all the
extended questions if you like.
I've heard, some bass fishermen saying that what Lake Champlain needs is round goby. Is there, are we doing anything to prevent the intentional stocking of the fish?
That's a hard one to get around without doing some really good outreach and education. And I mean, that's what it really boils down to. We have laws in place in different capacities that prevent certain species from being transported in bait buckets, and gobies are one of them. And the intentional release is illegal, but you kind of have to get caught, to get, to put an end to that. So really we need to focus on educating people on why it's a bad idea. And, I think bass anglers are coming around, but having fisheries like the Great Lakes and Lake St. Clair and the St. Lawrence River that are growing 6-7 pound plus smallmouth bass that are feeding on gobies, and having that, blasted across the internet and fishing magazines gives a different impression than what we want. And the article that was in Bassmasters magazine that I was part of, sort of explains why Lake Champlain is doing great on its own already without that. And, it comes along with diversity, not only with bass, but all the other fish in the lake. And, the potential, sure, might be there to see really big individual fish, but the loss that comes with it is less fish overall. You're going to have right. Yeah. You're going to have, more fish in that upper zone, but you're going to lose fish in the lower end that, recruits into the adult population and supports the fishery we have right now. So, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I just think that, Shawn's written some pretty brilliant articles, and it seems like it's going to take knowledge and some peer pressure among the angling community to help say, yep, those are great observations, and no thanks in Lake Champlain.
Do you know how many recreational boats are going through the canal?
there are estimates, it depends on the year, between about 2,000 to 5,000 lockings. I don't know how that translates to actual number of watercraft. Anybody else in the room have better numbers, please let me know, but that seems to be almost mirrored in the Chambly Canal system.
That's also
Somebody went through one boat that had multiple lockings.
Correct.
right. That doesn't mean a boat went all the way from the lower part of the lake or canal system to Champlain. They may have only went through one or two locks. So each time they go through a lock gate, that was counted as one.
So it'll be many fewer boats than 2,000 to 5,000.
Yeah.
Like
A couple of years ago, there was a number thrown out of about 200.
I'm getting some nods in the room, but
That just seems ridiculous that the lake would be risked for 200 pleasure boats.
I would love to put you in front of the media.
So switching gears a little bit, can anything be done on mitigation for the water fleas?
Oh, in Lake Champlain, there's no known control technology for trying to manage the population in the lake. We are most concerned about those very small critters and their resting eggs transporting on recreational craft and equipment unintentionally, hitchhiking to other bodies of water. So that's why we're really stressing the clean, drain, dry, and especially if you're exiting Lake Champlain and headed to an uninvaded water body, we're suggesting that you get your watercraft decontaminated, which means an internal flush of your motor and your bilge at 120 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah, some of the launches have the hot water wash down.
Yes. Yes. In fact, I will. They're circled on the map where the decontamination sites are. The yellow circles are where there's high pressure hot water decon.
So all your work is basically a subsidy for wealthy people. All the work to prevent the goby from coming on Lake Champlain is a subsidy for wealthy yacht owners.
Well, and I think everybody who would angle on the shores of Lake Champlain, I think those.
No, but if you shut the lock, you wouldn't have to do all this work. So if you shut the lock, you have the alternative. You could either subsidize wealthy boat owners by trying to manage the locks to keep them open, or you can shut them off.
Yeah, and I think that we have to be careful about the language that we use. The state of New York is required by the Constitution of New York to keep the locks open. And what is an interpretation of what open is? I mean, you can install an invasive species mitigation measure that would prevent all taxa from moving back and forth and still allow for navigability. But it may look something like a physical berm with a boat lift, or only utilizing a lock at low risk times with an electric barrier while we lift and decon recreational watercraft.
Thank you all for coming. And for those that have asked for an annual report, I have cards. I know Nicole had one info she gave me. I'll get those out. We're working on the 2024 annual report, which should be out probably later this summer. If you've signed in, I don't know if we have emails, we can send an email blast out just to let you know that it's available on the Fish and Wildlife Service website. Is where that is posted. Yeah. But thank you again, and thank you for all your support. It's very much appreciated.